Hi everyone, welcome to Red Umbrella. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Family Guy didn't just change as a show over its 25-year run. It underwent a complete political transformation that turned it from balanced satire into partisan activism. What started as a clever comedy that made fun of everyone equally became a platform for Seth MacFarlane to push his personal political views. And you can track this entire evolution by watching how the show treated controversial topics from 1999 to today. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. The Foundation. Early Family Guy's Balanced Satire, 1999 to 2003. When Family Guy first appeared on television screens in January 1999, nobody could have predicted it would become one of the most politically charged animated shows in television history. But in those early years, from 1999 to 2003, the show was something very different from what it would eventually become. It was a program that made fun of American culture and politics, but it did so in a way that felt more like observation than activism. The show poked fun at everyone and everything, without the heavy-handed political messaging that would later define it. The very first episode, Death Has a Shadow, which aired on January 31st, 1999, already showed that creator Seth MacFarlane wanted to include social and political commentary in his comedy. Critics at the time noticed that the show featured what they called oddball socio-political commentary, mixed in with the family's adventures. But here's the key difference from later seasons. This commentary felt natural, not forced. It was baked into the story rather than being the entire point of the story. The show's opening theme song actually told viewers exactly what MacFarlane was trying to do. The lyrics asked, "It seems today that all we see is violence in movies and sex on TV. But where are those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely?" This wasn't just a catchy tune. It was what critics call self-referential humor, meaning the show was making fun of itself and shows like it. Family Guy was acknowledging that it was also a show filled with inappropriate jokes and crude humor, while at the same time pretending to long for old-fashioned, wholesome entertainment. It was having its cake and eating it too, which is exactly what good satire does. During these first 3 seasons, the show followed the Griffin family in the fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island. Peter Griffin was the father, an overweight, blue-collar worker at a toy factory. His wife Lois came from a wealthy family, but chose to be a housewife and piano teacher. Their kids included Meg, the insecure teenage daughter, Chris, the dim-witted son, and Stewie, the evil genius baby who wanted to kill his mother and take over the world. And then there was Brian, the family dog who could talk and acted as the most rational person in the house. What made early Family Guy different from what it would become was the type of stories it told. Yes, the show was animated and featured outrageous situations, but the plots were relatively grounded in reality. One episode had Peter joining a local theater troupe. Another focused on him fearing a visit from his mother. There was an episode about Peter and Lois trying to rekindle their relationship by following the rock band Kiss on tour. These were exaggerated versions of normal family problems, not the completely insane scenarios that would dominate later seasons. The show was often criticized in these early years for being too similar to The Simpsons, and honestly, the comparison was fair. Both shows featured an overweight, beer-drinking father who worked a blue-collar job. Both had a more intelligent, long-suffering wife. Both had an oddball baby, a son who resembled his father, and a daughter who nobody seemed to appreciate. The formats were nearly identical. But Family Guy tried to set itself apart by being edgier, more willing to cross lines that The Simpsons wouldn't cross. The humor in these early seasons was described by critics as smart and dialogue-based. What this means is that the jokes came from the characters actually talking to each other and reacting to situations, not just from random cutaway gags showing unrelated scenes. Yes, the cutaway gags were already there in season 1, but they weren't the main event. They were seasoning, not the entire meal. A typical early episode might have 5 or 6 cutaways, while later episodes would sometimes have 20 or more. Let me give you a concrete example of how the show handled politics in these early years. In season 2, there was an episode called I Am Peter, Hear Me Roar, that dealt with sexual harassment and feminism. Peter tells an inappropriate joke to a female coworker, and she sues him. He's forced to attend a women's retreat and comes back acting stereotypically feminine. The episode made fun of both Peter's sexist attitudes and the over-the-top feminist lawyer named Gloria Ironbox. It took shots at everyone involved. Nobody got treated as completely right or completely wrong. This was the show's approach to controversial topics in the early days. Make fun of all sides equally. Another example is the episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, which was actually produced in 2000 during season 2, but didn't air on Fox until 2004 because the network thought it might be offensive to Jewish people. In the episode, Peter loses his family's money to a scam artist and decides he needs a Jewish accountant because he believes in the stereotype that Jewish people are good with money. He eventually tries to convert his son Chris to Judaism because he thinks it will make Chris smarter and more successful. Now, this sounds really offensive when you describe it like that, and Fox certainly thought it was too risky to air. But here's what's interesting. MacFarlane showed the script to 2 rabbis before making the episode, and both of them approved it. Why? Because, as MacFarlane explained, Peter learns the right lesson at the end. The episode concludes with Peter's wife Lois explaining that success isn't based on religion, and Peter realizes his mistake. Plus, as MacFarlane pointed out, about 70% of the show's writers were Jewish, including Ricky Blitt, who wrote that particular episode. This episode is actually a perfect example of how early Family Guy approached sensitive topics. It would show a character like Peter having ignorant, stereotypical views, let him act on those views in increasingly ridiculous ways, and then show him learning why those views were wrong. The comedy came from watching Peter be an idiot, not from the show itself endorsing his idiocy. Later seasons would lose this structure, but in the early days, it was how almost every episode worked. The characters in these early seasons also had more depth than they would later have. Brian the dog was described by critics as the voice of reason in the family with a dry sense of humor. He would call out Peter's stupid behavior and try to help the family make better decisions. He drank martinis and read the newspaper, which was funny because he was a dog doing human things. But he wasn't yet the preachy political spokesman he would become. In fact, in some early episodes, Brian even mentioned believing in God, which completely contradicts his later characterization as a militant atheist. Peter himself was different too. Yes, he was overweight and not very smart, but he was still recognizable as a real person. He loved his family. He cared about his friends. He worked hard at his job, even if he didn't like it. He made mistakes, but usually tried to make things right. One critic described early Peter as a relatable, if somewhat exaggerated figure, who was a typical working man who loved his family and spent time with his friends in the bar. This is a far cry from what Peter would become in later seasons. The show's political commentary in these early years was present but subtle. The very fact that it aired on Fox, a conservative network, while making fun of conservative values, was itself a political statement. But the show also made fun of liberal attitudes, religious hypocrisies, suburban conformity, and really anything that seemed ridiculous about American life. There was no consistent political agenda beyond, let's make fun of stuff that seems dumb. When critics from this era discussed Family Guy, they noted that it explored cultural and political themes that are important in the world today. The show tackled issues like sexual harassment in the workplace, religious intolerance, class differences, and generational conflicts. But it did so through the lens of this absurd cartoon family, which made the commentary easier to digest. You weren't being lectured about feminism. You were watching Peter Griffin accidentally become a feminist and make a fool of himself. The animation style in these early seasons was also notably different from later years. The first episode had what critics called crude animation even for that time period. The characters moved stiffly, and the artwork wasn't as polished as it would become. But this actually added to the show's charm in a way. It felt more homemade, less like a corporate product. As the show found success and got a bigger budget, the animation became smoother and more professional. But some fans argue it lost some of its personality in the process. What's really important to understand about these early seasons is the context in which they aired. This was 1999 to 2003, a very different time in American culture. The internet existed, but wasn't yet dominating everyone's lives. Social media didn't exist. Political discussions hadn't yet become the all-consuming, everyone-picks-a-side battles they are today. People could watch a show make fun of both political parties and just laugh, without feeling like they had to defend their team. The show also benefited from low expectations. Nobody expected an animated show on Fox to be particularly smart or meaningful. The Simpsons had already proven that animated shows could be intelligent, but most people still thought of cartoons as kids' stuff. So when Family Guy came along and tackled adult topics with sharp writing, It felt fresh and exciting. The show was getting away with things that regular sitcoms couldn't do because it had the cover of being just a cartoon. Fox canceled Family Guy in 2003 after 3 seasons. The ratings weren't terrible, but they weren't great either. The network didn't see enough potential to keep it going. And honestly, at that point, it seemed like Family Guy had said what it needed to say. It was a funny show that made fun of suburban American life with a slightly edgier take than The Simpsons. That was it. Nobody thought it would become a cultural phenomenon or a vehicle for political messaging. But something unexpected happened after the cancellation. The show found a second life in reruns on a cable channel called Adult Swim, which showed cartoons late at night for older audiences. People who had never seen the show during its original run discovered it and loved it. Even more importantly, the DVDs of the first 3 seasons sold incredibly well. Fox noticed that people were buying DVDs of a canceled show and watching it religiously on cable. They realized they had made a mistake. The decision to bring Family Guy back would change everything about what the show was and what it would become. But before we get into that transformation, it's worth appreciating what the show was in these early years. A clever, balanced satire that made fun of American culture without picking political sides, featuring characters with real depth and stories that, while exaggerated, were still grounded in recognizable human experiences. This was Family Guy before it became a political statement. This was Family Guy when it was just trying to be funny. The show had always included social commentary, but it was commentary in service of comedy, not comedy in service of commentary. That distinction might seem small, but it would prove to be everything. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. When the show returned in 2005, it would come back different, and one character's transformation would signal just how different things were about to become. Section 2. Brian Griffin, from voice of reason to political mouthpiece. If you wanted to understand how Family Guy changed over the years, you could watch every single episode from beginning to end and track all the differences. Or you could just watch Brian Griffin. The talking dog who started as the smartest character in the house somehow became the most annoying. His transformation from a reasonable, thoughtful character into what critics called a loudspeaker for Seth MacFarlane's political views tells you everything you need to know about what happened to this show. In the early seasons, Brian was actually a great character. He was funny precisely because he was a dog who acted like the most human member of the family. While Peter acted like a child, and Stewie literally was a child, Brian was the adult in the room. He drank martinis, read classic literature, and tried to be a voice of reason when the family spiraled into chaos. The joke was simple but effective. The family pet had more common sense than the actual humans. Critics from those early years described Brian as having, quote, a dry sense of humor and being, quote, the voice of reason in the family. When Peter did something stupid, which was often, Brian would call it out. When the family faced a problem, Brian would try to help them solve it logically. He wasn't perfect. He had flaws like any good character should, but he was fundamentally decent and rational. You could trust Brian to be the one character who would see through nonsense and speak truth. Here's something that might surprise you if you've only watched recent Family Guy episodes. Early Brian believed in God. Or at least, he mentioned God in ways that suggested he had religious faith. This is a complete 180 from later seasons where Brian's atheism becomes one of his defining traits. The Brian of seasons 1 through 3 wasn't defined by any particular political or religious view. He was just a well-read, slightly pretentious dog who tried to keep his family out of trouble. But then the show got canceled in 2003 and came back in 2005, and Brian came back as a different character. It didn't happen all at once. The change was gradual enough that casual viewers might not have noticed at first. But if you watched the early seasons and then jumped to season 7 or 8, you'd think Brian had been replaced by an evil twin. Actually, many fans would argue the evil twin would be an improvement. The new Brian had very strong political opinions, and he never shut up about them. He became what people call a textbook liberal, meaning he held progressive political views and made sure everyone around him knew it. He talked about politics constantly, he argued with people about religion and social issues, he looked down on anyone who didn't share his worldview. And worst of all, the show seemed to agree with everything he said. One of the most famous criticisms of Brian comes from within the show itself. There's a scene where another character named Quagmire goes on a long rant about everything wrong with Brian. Quagmire points out that Brian has a textbook liberal agenda, but doesn't actually do anything to help the causes he claims to care about. Brian talks about how homelessness is an important issue, but has never actually helped a homeless person. He claims to care about the environment, but drives a Prius just to feel superior to others. He failed college twice, but calls religious people idiots for believing in God. This scene is fascinating because it shows that even the writers of Family Guy knew Brian had become unbearable. They were acknowledging, through Quagmire's character, that Brian was a hypocrite and a blowhard. But here's the problem. Acknowledging it didn't fix it. After that episode aired, Brian went right back to being the same preachy, annoying character. The show pointed out its own flaw and then kept doing it anyway. Let's talk about what changed specifically. Early Brian was quietly intelligent. He might correct Peter when Peter said something factually wrong, but he did it kindly, like a friend helping another friend. New Brian was loudly intelligent, or at least he thought he was. He would jump at any chance to show off his knowledge or make someone else feel stupid. Early Brian had confidence. New Brian had arrogance. Early Brian had relationships and storylines that had nothing to do with politics. He dated women, pursued his dream of becoming a writer, struggled with alcohol, and dealt with family problems like any character would. New Brian's stories almost always came back to his political beliefs somehow. It was like the writers forgot he could be interesting in other ways. The drinking is actually a good example of how the character changed. In early seasons, Brian enjoyed a martini, which was funny because dogs don't normally drink martinis. It was a quirky character trait. But in later seasons, Brian's drinking became a serious problem. He became what critics called an alcoholic who couldn't function without alcohol. This should have been treated as a character flaw, a sign that Brian had problems he needed to address. Instead, it was mostly played for laughs, or ignored entirely. Brian would be stumbling drunk in one episode and perfectly fine the next, with no acknowledgement of his addiction. The same thing happened with his relationships with women. Early Brian had normal dating problems. He'd meet someone, things would go well or badly, and the relationship would end. Later, Brian became what critics described as promiscuous, meaning he slept with many different women and often treated them poorly. Multiple episodes showed him lying to women, cheating on them, or using them. Again, this should have been portrayed as Brian being a bad person, but the show often let him get away with it. But the biggest change was Brian's attitude toward religion. This deserves its own detailed look because it's so central to how the character transformed. There's an episode from 2009 called Not All Dogs Go to Heaven that perfectly captures everything wrong with new Brian. In this episode, Meg becomes a born-again Christian and discovers that Brian is an atheist. She tells everyone in town and they all turn against Brian. He can't go anywhere without being harassed. Most importantly, he can't buy alcohol because every store bans him. Now, you might think this episode is about religious tolerance and how wrong it is to persecute someone for their beliefs. And maybe that's what the writers thought they were making. But what actually comes across is Brian being incredibly mean to Meg about her faith. At one point, Brian tells Meg that if God existed, he wouldn't have made her ugly and unloved. He uses her insecurities and pain as evidence against God's existence. This isn't thoughtful atheism, it's just cruelty. The episode also shows Brian's arguments against religion as being really shallow. His main proof that God doesn't exist is that the Hubble Space Telescope has taken pictures of deep space and never photographed God sitting on a cloud. That's not a serious philosophical argument. That's something a middle schooler might say. But the show presents it like Brian is making brilliant points that religious people just can't handle. Here's what makes this even more interesting. On the DVD commentary for this episode, Seth MacFarlane himself admitted they messed up. He and the other writers said they tried to be balanced between religion and atheism, but came off a little heavy-handed and regret how the episode turned out. MacFarlane acknowledged that the episode was criticized for being a soapbox for Seth MacFarlane to preach atheism. And he's right. That's exactly what it was. This brings us to an important point about Brian. He's Seth MacFarlane's character in a very specific way. MacFarlane voices Brian, along with Peter, Stewie, and Quagmire. But Brian is the one who shares MacFarlane's actual political views. Critics and fans have called Brian MacFarlane's author avatar, or self-parody, meaning Brian is essentially MacFarlane inserting himself into the show. When Brian rants about politics, those are MacFarlane's real opinions coming out. MacFarlane has been very open about his liberal political views in real life. He's donated money to Democratic political candidates. He's spoken out against Fox News, even though Family Guy airs on Fox. He's been critical of religion and supportive of atheism in interviews and public appearances. None of this is secret or controversial in itself. People are allowed to have political opinions. The problem is when those opinions take over a character in a way that makes the character less interesting and less funny. There's an episode from 2010 called Excellence in Broadcasting, where Brian meets the conservative talk radio host Rush Limbaugh. In the episode, Limbaugh convinces Brian to become a Republican temporarily. Brian starts spouting conservative talking points and even sings a song about Republican values. It's supposed to be satirical, showing how ridiculous Brian looks when he flip-flops on his beliefs. But the episode received terrible reviews, with critics giving it a grade of D and calling it toothless. What's revealing about this episode is that it shows the writers knew they had a reputation for being one-sidedly liberal. They were trying to prove they could make fun of both sides equally. MacFarlane even said in an interview that they reached out to Republicans asking who wanted to be in the episode, and Rush Limbaugh agreed to voice himself. But the episode still felt like it was making fun of conservatives, while Brian's liberal views were treated as his natural, correct state. The change in Brian's character represents a bigger pattern in the show. When Family Guy first started, all the characters had multiple sides to their personalities. They could be smart and dumb, kind and mean, confident and insecure, all in the same episode. As the seasons went on, each character became more and more one-dimensional. Peter became purely stupid and mean, Meg became purely pathetic, Stewie became purely gay-coded instead of evil, and Brian became purely political. There's actually a word for this in television criticism: flanderization, named after Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. It's when a character's one trait gets exaggerated over time until it becomes their only trait. Ned Flanders started as a friendly neighbor who happened to be religious, but over time, he became nothing but religious. The same thing happened to Brian, except his defining trait became his political liberalism instead of religion. Critics started calling Brian a hypocrite because of the gap between what he claimed to believe and how he actually acted. He talked about women's rights, but treated women terribly. He claimed to care about social justice, but looked down on working-class people like Peter. He spoke about tolerance, but was completely intolerant of anyone who disagreed with him. He positioned himself as an intellectual, but his arguments were often simplistic and shallow. Fans noticed this change, and many of them hated it. Online discussions about Family Guy in the 2000s are filled with people saying Brian became their least favorite character. Some fans even celebrated when there was an episode in season 12 where Brian got hit by a car and died. The show brought him back 3 episodes later, but the fact that fans were happy to see him go tells you how far the character had fallen. What makes Brian's transformation so significant is that he was supposed to be the character viewers identified with. In a family full of idiots and weirdos, Brian was the normal one. He was our window into the Griffin family's chaos. When he changed from a relatable voice of reason into a preachy political spokesman, it changed the entire feel of the show. Instead of watching a family comedy that happened to include some political jokes, viewers were now watching a political show that happened to be disguised as a family comedy. The saddest part is that glimpses of old Brian still appeared occasionally. There would be episodes where he had genuine emotions, where he struggled with real problems, where he showed the depth he used to have all the time. These moments reminded viewers that Brian could still be a good character if the writers let him be. But more often than not, he was reduced to being MacFarlane's mouthpiece for whatever political issue was in the news that week. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Brian's evolution from thoughtful observer to obnoxious activist didn't happen in isolation. It reflected a larger change in how Family Guy approached controversial topics. The show that once made fun of everyone equally was starting to pick sides, and nowhere would this be more obvious than in how the show handled religion. Section 3. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, the banned episode that set the tone. There's an episode of Family Guy that Fox refused to air for 4 entire years. It was made in 2000, but it didn't show up on television until 2004. Even then, parts of it were cut out and changed before anyone could see it. This episode, called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, became one of the most talked about pieces of Family Guy history, even though most people couldn't actually watch it for years. The story of this banned episode tells you a lot about how Family Guy approached touchy subjects, and how far the network would let them go. The episode starts with Peter Griffin losing all of his family's emergency money. He gives it to a salesman who promises it's a safe investment, but the guy turns out to be a scam artist who steals the money and disappears. Peter feels terrible. His family is broke, and it's all his fault. He doesn't know how to get the money back or fix his mistake. He's sitting at home feeling sorry for himself when something happens that gives him an idea. A Jewish man named Max Weinstein is driving past the Griffin house when his car breaks down right in front of their driveway. Peter sees this as a sign from God. You see, Peter believes in a very specific stereotype, that Jewish people are naturally good with money. He thinks that if he can get this Jewish man to help him, all his financial problems will be solved. So Peter literally chases Max down the street and forces him to become his accountant. Max actually does help Peter. He figures out who scammed the family and gets their money back. Peter is so impressed that he invites Max over for dinner. The family goes to synagogue with Max and learns about Jewish customs and traditions. Everything seems fine so far. The episode is showing Peter learning about a different religion and culture. But then, Peter gets an idea that takes things in a weird direction. Peter decides that the secret to success in life is being Jewish. And if being Jewish makes you successful, then his son Chris needs to become Jewish. Chris is not doing well in school. He's failing most of his classes. Peter thinks that converting Chris to Judaism will magically make him smarter and more successful. So Peter secretly drives Chris to Las Vegas for what's called a bar mitzvah, which is a Jewish coming-of-age ceremony for boys. Lois finds out what Peter is planning and is furious. She borrows their neighbor Quagmire's car and drives all the way from Rhode Island to Las Vegas to stop the ceremony. She bursts into the synagogue just in time and tells everyone that Peter's plan is ridiculous. Success doesn't come from what religion you are, she explains. It comes from hard work and being a good person. Peter realizes she's right and feels bad about what he tried to do. But the episode doesn't end there. Peter and his family escape from the angry people at the synagogue and get on a bus to go home. It turns out the bus is full of Catholic nuns who are very angry that Peter, who was raised Catholic, went to a synagogue and tried to convert his son to a different religion. The nuns attack the family with rulers. That's how the episode ends, with the Griffins getting beaten up by nuns because they can't win no matter what they do. Now, let me tell you about the song. In the middle of this episode, Peter sings a musical number called I Need a Jew. It's a parody of the famous Disney song When You Wish Upon a Star from the movie Pinocchio. Peter sings about how he needs to find a Jewish person to help him with his money problems. The song goes through all the stereotypical ideas Peter has about Jewish people being good with finances. This song became a huge problem, not just because of the content, but because of copyright law. The company that owned the rights to When You Wish Upon a Star, called Born Music Company, decided to sue. They claimed that Family Guy had stolen their song and made a parody that was so offensive it damaged the value of the original. They sued several Fox divisions, Cartoon Network, Seth MacFarlane himself, and the show's composer, Walter Murphy. They wanted money, and they wanted the episode to stop being shown anywhere. The lawsuit went on for years. Finally, in March 2009, a judge named Deborah Batts made a ruling. She said that Family Guy did not break copyright law. The show was allowed to make a parody of the song, and they could keep showing the episode. But by that point, the episode had already been banned from Fox for 4 years and had only been shown on a late-night cable channel called Adult Swim. But wait, why did Fox ban the episode in the first place? The network executives were worried that people would think the episode was anti-Semitic, which means prejudiced against Jewish people. They thought viewers would be offended by Peter's stereotypes about Jewish people being good with money. They were afraid of controversy and protests. So even though the episode was finished and ready to air in 2000, they pulled it at the last minute. Seth MacFarlane was really frustrated by this decision. Before one airing of the episode on Adult Swim, he introduced it by saying it was the episode that Fox refused to air because they felt it was too risky. Then he added sarcastically that too risky means anything that doesn't feature Paris Hilton, half naked on the hood of a car. He was making fun of Fox for being willing to show other controversial content, but not his episode. He also explained that the episode was centered around Peter Griffin's misconceptions of the Jewish community. MacFarlane had actually tried to be careful about this episode. He knew it dealt with sensitive material, so before they made it, he showed the script to 2 rabbis, religious leaders in the Jewish faith. Both rabbis read the script and told him it was okay. They approved the episode because, as MacFarlane said, Peter learns the right lesson at the end. The episode shows Peter being wrong about his stereotypes, It shows him learning that religion doesn't determine success. The message is actually anti-prejudiced, not prejudiced. McFarlane also pointed out something else in the episode's defense. About 70% of the writers working on Family Guy were Jewish. The person who wrote this specific episode, Ricky Blitt, was Jewish. The actor who voiced Max Weinstein, Ben Stein, was Jewish. So it wasn't a bunch of non-Jewish people making fun of Judaism. It was largely Jewish writers and performers making fun of how ignorant people like Peter misunderstand their culture. But Fox didn't care about any of that. They were too nervous to air it. So the episode sat on a shelf for years. It was finally included on the Season 2 DVD set when that came out in September 2003. This meant that people who bought the DVDs could watch it at home, even though it wasn't on TV. Then, in November 2003, Adult Swim showed it late at night. Finally, in December 2004, Fox aired a censored version of the episode on regular television. What did they censor? Well, remember that song, I Need a Jew? In the original version, the last line of the song was, "Though by many they're abhorred, Hebrew people I've adored. Even though they killed my Lord, I need a Jew." That line about killed my Lord refers to an old anti-Semitic belief that Jewish people were responsible for Jesus' death. Fox made them change it to I don't think they killed my Lord for the TV version. This small change was meant to make the song less offensive. They also cut out some other scenes to make the episode shorter and remove some of the more controversial moments. The version that aired on Fox was tamer than the version people could watch on DVD or on Adult Swim. Even years after making the episode, the network was still nervous about it. Here's what's interesting about this whole situation. The controversy probably made the episode more famous than it would have been otherwise. If it had just aired normally in 2000, people might have watched it and forgotten about it. But because it was banned, people talked about it constantly. Fans wanted to see the forbidden episode. When it finally became available, everyone rushed to watch it. The ban created way more attention than the episode would have gotten on its own. And honestly, when you actually watch the episode, it's not as shocking as the controversy would make you think. Yes, Peter has stereotypical views about Jewish people, but the whole point is that Peter is an idiot. The episode makes fun of Peter for having these dumb ideas. It shows that his stereotypes are wrong. Lois directly tells him that success has nothing to do with religion. The episode is actually teaching a lesson against prejudice. Lisa Keyes, a writer for a Jewish newspaper called The Forward, watched the episode and wrote that it was not necessarily demeaning to Jews, but was too vapid to be funny. Vapid means empty or meaningless. So her criticism wasn't that it was offensive to Jewish people, it was that it wasn't clever enough. She thought the jokes were lazy, and the episode didn't have much to say. This episode set a pattern for how Family Guy would handle controversial topics going forward. The show would take something sensitive, religion, race, politics, whatever, and have Peter approach it with complete ignorance. Peter would say and do offensive things based on stereotypes and misunderstandings. Then by the end of the episode, he'd learn a lesson about why he was wrong. This formula let the show make offensive jokes while claiming they were actually teaching good lessons. But there's a problem with this approach. When you spend 20 minutes showing a character doing offensive things and only 2 minutes showing them learning a lesson, what do people remember? They remember the offensive stuff. They remember the jokes based on stereotypes. The lesson at the end feels tacked on, like the writers are trying to get away with something by adding a moral at the last second. The When You Wish Upon a Weinstein episode also revealed something about the relationship between Family Guy and Fox. The network was willing to air all kinds of crude humor, sex jokes, violence, swearing, but they got nervous when the show tackled religion or politics directly. They were okay with Peter doing gross or stupid things, but they worried about Peter having opinions about real groups of people. This created a weird situation where Family Guy could show almost anything, as long as it was random and meaningless. But when the show tried to actually comment on society in a specific way, the network pushed back. McFarlane clearly found this frustrating. He wanted to make a show that said something about American culture, not just a show that was shocking for the sake of being shocking. The episode was supposed to air as the 5th episode of Season 2. Because it got pulled, the production schedule got messed up. Other episodes that were supposed to air later got moved up to fill the gap. The episode was given a production code of 2ACX05, which shows when it was made, but it didn't air in that order. This meant that storylines and character development got shuffled around in ways the writers hadn't planned. When the episode finally did air in 2004, The world was different than it had been in 2000. 4 years had passed. Family Guy had been canceled and brought back. The political climate in America had changed after the September 11th attacks in 2001. Conversations about religion and tolerance had shifted. The episode that seemed too risky in 2000 didn't seem quite as shocking in 2004. But the lessons from this banned episode stuck with the show's creators. They learned that Fox had limits, even if those limits seemed inconsistent. They learned that controversy could actually help a show by getting people talking about it. And they learned that they could get away with a lot as long as they included some kind of moral lesson at the end, even if that lesson felt forced. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This episode was Family Guy testing the boundaries of what it could say about religion. The network pushed back and said, "Not this far." But it was just the beginning of the show's complicated relationship with faith and belief. Soon, Brian's atheism would become a major part of his character, and the show would stop being subtle about its views on religion at all. Section 4. I am Peter. Hear me roar. Family Guy's complicated relationship with feminism. In the year 2000, during Family Guy's second season, the show decided to tackle feminism and sexual harassment in the workplace. The episode was called I Am Peter. Hear Me Roar. And it perfectly shows how Family Guy tried to make fun of social issues while also claiming to support the right side. The episode starts out seeming like it's going to criticize sexism, but by the end, it's actually making fun of feminism itself. It's a great example of how the show would say one thing while really meaning something completely different. The episode begins with Peter acting the way Peter always acts, like an idiot who doesn't think before he speaks. He's at work at the toy factory where he has a job, and he's talking to a female coworker. He tells her an inappropriate joke that's sexual in nature. The woman doesn't laugh. She doesn't think it's funny at all. Instead, she decides to sue Peter and the company for sexual harassment. Now, in real life, this would be a serious situation. Sexual harassment at work is a real problem that real people deal with. The woman has every right to be upset that her coworker is making her uncomfortable with sexual jokes. But the show doesn't really treat it that seriously. Instead, it treats it like Peter got in trouble for being himself, like he's the victim of someone being too sensitive. The lawsuit goes forward, and Peter has two choices. He can get fired, or he can attend a women's retreat to learn about sensitivity and respect. Peter chooses the retreat because he needs his job. So he goes off to this weekend program where he's supposed to learn to understand women's perspectives and stop being sexist. At the retreat, Peter does all the activities. He listens to women talk about their experiences. He participates in group discussions. And something happens that nobody expected. Peter actually seems to learn something. When he comes home, he's completely changed. He's in touch with his feelings. He wants to talk about emotions. He's sensitive and caring and understanding. But here's where the episode shows its real attitude toward feminism. The show doesn't portray this new Peter as better. Instead, it portrays him as wrong and broken. The episode treats Peter being sensitive like it's a disease he caught. His new personality isn't shown as an improvement. It's shown as Peter losing his masculinity and becoming someone he's not supposed to be. The episode shows Peter doing things that are stereotypically feminine. He wants to cuddle with Lois instead of just having sex. He tries to breastfeed baby Stewie, which obviously doesn't work because men can't breastfeed. He takes long bubble baths with candles. He checks himself for breast cancer, even though he's a man. He even thinks he might have missed his period, which makes no sense because men don't have periods. All of these scenes are played for laughs, and the joke is always, look how ridiculous Peter is acting like a woman. The worst part is how this affects Peter and Lois's relationship. Lois is frustrated because Peter can't satisfy her sexually anymore. The episode makes it very clear that this new sensitive Peter is bad in bed. He's too emotional, too focused on feelings, too feminine. Lois wants the old Peter back. The Peter who was kind of sexist and insensitive, but at least was a real man who could perform sexually. Peter's friends are also disgusted by his new personality. They don't want to hang out with him anymore. They make fun of him for acting feminine. The message is clear. Being sensitive and in touch with your feelings makes you less of a man, and being less of a man is the worst thing you can be. Now let me tell you about the character of Gloria Ironbox, because her name alone tells you what the show really thinks about feminists. She's the lawyer representing the woman who sued Peter. Her last name is Ironbox, which is about as subtle as hitting you over the head with a brick. It's combining iron, which is hard and inflexible, with a slang term for female anatomy. The name is basically saying this woman is rigid and defined entirely by being female. Gloria Ironbox is portrayed exactly how people who hate feminism imagine feminists to be. She's angry all the time. She hates men. She's humorless and can't take a joke. She sees sexism everywhere, even when it's not there. The show doesn't even try to give her any depth or make her seem like a real person. She's just a walking stereotype of an, quote, angry feminist. At one point in the episode, Lois has a conversation with Gloria Ironbox, where Lois defends her choice to be a stay-at-home mom. Lois says, "Look, I'm all for equality, but if you ask me, feminism is about choice. I choose to be a wife and mother, and now I'm choosing to end this conversation." This sounds reasonable on the surface. Feminism is about women having choices, right? Women should be able to choose to be housewives if that's what they want. But here's the sneaky part. The show is using this idea of choice feminism to dismiss all of Gloria's points about workplace sexism. It's basically saying some feminists are okay because they don't make a fuss, but feminists like Gloria, who actually call out bad behavior, are too much. The show is praising the feminism that doesn't challenge anything, while mocking the feminism that tries to change things. The episode's climax comes when Gloria and Lois get into a physical fight. It's staged like a scene from an old soap opera called Dynasty, which was famous for having a fight scene between two women. Gloria and Lois roll around fighting while Peter watches. And watching this fight between two women is what finally brings Peter back to his old self. He gets turned on by watching the violence, and suddenly, his masculinity returns. This is really important to understand. Peter doesn't go back to normal because he realizes that being sensitive is actually okay in moderation, or because he finds a balance between his old self and his new self. He goes back to normal because he gets sexually excited watching women fight. The episode is literally saying that the cure for sensitivity is sexual violence. Once Peter is back to his old self, he and Lois have great sex. The episode makes it very clear that this is a good thing. Sexist Peter, who makes inappropriate jokes, is better than sensitive Peter, who respects women, because sexist Peter can satisfy his wife sexually. That's the actual message of the episode, whether the writers meant it that way or not. Critics and people who study television have written about this episode, and many of them point out that it's virulently anti-feminist. That means it's strongly against feminism. Even though the episode starts by showing that Peter's sexual harassment is wrong, it ends by suggesting that feminists are the real problem. It shows feminism as something that destroys masculinity and ruins relationships. There's a bigger pattern here that's worth pointing out. The episode spends about 18 minutes making fun of feminists and showing Peter acting ridiculous as a sensitive man. Then it spends maybe 2 minutes at the end, where Lois says feminism is about choice. Those 2 minutes are supposed to make the whole episode seem balanced and fair. But what do you remember after watching? You remember all the jokes about Peter acting feminine and Gloria Ironbox being an angry man-hater? This is the same trick the show used in When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. Spend most of the episode showing offensive stereotypes and behavior, then add a little moral lesson at the end to claim you were actually teaching good values all along. It's a way of having your cake and eating it too. Getting to make all the offensive jokes while pretending to be progressive. What makes this even more complicated is that the episode does show that Peter's original behavior was wrong. He did sexually harass his coworker. She had a right to be upset. The episode doesn't completely excuse what Peter did. But it also suggests that the punishment went too far and turned Peter into something unnatural. The episode seems to be saying, yes, sexual harassment is bad, but feminists overreact, and men shouldn't have to become sensitive and emotional. It's trying to find a middle ground, but the middle ground it finds is basically, men should harass, women a little less, but feminists should also stop complaining so much. Seth MacFarlane has said in interviews that he supports women's rights and considers himself a feminist. Before Family Guy, he wrote an episode of a show called Johnny Bravo that was actually called Sensitive Male and dealt with similar themes. So it's not like he's someone who openly hates feminism. But this episode of Family Guy sure makes it seem like feminism is something to be mocked. This points to a bigger issue with how Family Guy handles social topics. The show wants to be edgy and controversial, so it makes fun of social movements like feminism. But it also wants to seem progressive and on the right side of history, so it includes moments that seem to support those same movements. The result is confusing and often sends the opposite message from what the creators probably intended. The character of Peter is also important here. Peter is an idiot. Everyone knows he's an idiot. When Peter says or does something offensive, we're supposed to laugh at him for being stupid, not agree with him. But when the entire episode is built around the idea that Peter being sensitive is wrong, and Peter being sexist is natural, it stops being, look at this idiot, and starts being, Peter is right. There's also something to notice about how the episode treats different kinds of women. Lois is portrayed as reasonable because she's okay with traditional gender roles. She likes being a housewife. She wants her husband to be masculine. She's not trying to change anything about society. Gloria Ironbox is portrayed as unreasonable because she's challenging the system and calling out sexism. The episode rewards women who don't rock the boat and punishes women who do. The sexual harassment victim herself barely appears in the episode. We don't learn her name or hear her side of the story. She exists only to create the conflict that starts the plot. The episode isn't interested in her perspective or her feelings. It's only interested in how the situation affects Peter. Even in an episode supposedly about sexual harassment, the woman being harassed isn't important enough to be a real character. When this episode aired in 2000, some people praised it for being brave enough to tackle sexual harassment. Others criticized it for the exact reasons I've been explaining, that it ultimately mocks feminism more than it supports it. The mixed reaction shows how Family Guy has always been able to claim different things to different audiences. Progressives could point to the parts criticizing sexism. Conservatives could point to the parts mocking feminism. Everyone could find something to agree with. This episode also shows Family Guy's attitude toward men's emotions and mental health. The idea that a man being sensitive and emotional is wrong and unnatural is actually really harmful. Men should be allowed to have feelings and express them. But the episode treats male sensitivity as a joke, as something broken that needs to be fixed. The only way for Peter to be a real man again is to shut down his emotions and go back to being crude. Looking back at this episode more than 20 years later, it feels even more uncomfortable. We've had bigger conversations about sexual harassment, especially after the Me Too movement started in 2017. We understand better now how serious workplace harassment is and how it affects people. An episode that treats it as seriously as this one does feels outdated and kind of gross. But this episode wasn't just a one-time thing. It established a pattern for how Family Guy would handle controversial social topics, make fun of everyone involved, include stereotypes of both sides, add a moral lesson that seems reasonable but doesn't really commit to anything. This formula let the show claim it was being balanced while actually taking pretty clear positions. The episode's title is a reference to a 1970s song called I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar by Helen Reddy, which became a feminist anthem. By changing it to I Am Peter, Hear Me Roar, the show is making Peter's story seem as important as women's struggles for equality. It's treating Peter's temporary discomfort with sensitivity as equivalent to women's fight for basic respect and rights. What this episode really revealed is that Family Guy was more interested in making edgy jokes than in actually supporting any cause. The show wanted to seem smart and socially aware, but it didn't want to commit to any position that might limit what jokes it could make. This approach would define how the show handled politics and social issues for years to come. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And these early controversial episodes were just warm-up acts. When Fox canceled the show in 2003 and then brought it back in 2005, everything would change about how bold Family Guy was willing to be. Section 5. The uncancellation effect. How resurrection changed everything. In 2003, Fox decided to cancel Family Guy. The show had run for 3 seasons, and while it had fans, the ratings just weren't good enough to keep it on the air. When shows get canceled, that's usually the end of the story. The episodes that exist keep getting shown in reruns, but no new ones get made. Everyone moves on. But Family Guy's story was different, and what happened next changed the show completely. After Fox canceled the show, something unexpected started happening. A cable channel called Adult Swim, which showed cartoons late at night for grown-ups, started playing Family Guy reruns. And people watched them. A lot of people. The ratings for these reruns were huge. People who had never seen the show during its original run were discovering it and falling in love with it. They'd stay up late just to watch episodes they'd already seen before. At the same time, Fox released the first 3 seasons on DVD. This was still pretty early in the DVD era, when not every show was available to buy and own. The DVDs sold incredibly well. People were buying boxed sets of a canceled show, which was basically unheard of. They wanted to own the episodes so they could watch them whenever they wanted and show them to their friends. Fox executives noticed what was happening. They saw that a show they had canceled was making them money through DVD sales and getting great ratings on another network. They realized they had made a mistake. So in 2005, they did something that almost never happens in television. They brought the show back. Family Guy was uncancelled. But the show that came back in 2005 was not the same show that had been canceled in 2003. Something fundamental had changed. The creators and writers knew they had been canceled once already. They knew the show could disappear again at any moment. And that knowledge made them bolder, more willing to take risks, less worried about crossing lines or offending people. Critics who watched the show before and after the cancellation noticed the difference immediately. They said the show had gone through a, quote, departure from more smart, dialogue-based humor in favor of shock and gross-out humor. What this means is that the jokes stopped being clever wordplay and character interactions. Instead, they became about showing disgusting things or saying the most offensive thing possible just for shock value. The stories changed too. Remember how early Family Guy had relatively normal plots, like Peter joining a theater group or the family going on vacation? Those grounded, relatable stories mostly disappeared. After the show came back, episodes became, quote, totally outlandish. They would do entire episodes parodying Star Wars. They'd have episodes where Peter and a giant chicken would fight for 5 straight minutes for no real reason. They'd do time travel stories, horror movie parodies, and episodes that had nothing to do with the family at all. The show became what critics called the most crass program it can possibly be. Crass means rude, vulgar, and lacking in taste. The humor got meaner, the violence got more graphic, the sexual content got more explicit. Things that the pre-cancellation show might have implied or suggested, the post-cancellation show would show directly and in detail. One big change was the increased focus on, quote, graphic violence and gore. Early Family Guy had cartoon violence, sure. People would get hit or hurt in silly ways. But post-cancellation, Family Guy started showing blood, broken bones, and injuries in much more realistic and disturbing ways. There would be scenes of characters suffering that went on way longer than necessary, where the suffering itself was supposed to be the joke. The characters themselves went through what critics called drastic changes, and not for the better. Peter stopped being a lovable idiot and became what people described as downright abusive and callous. He would do truly terrible things to his family and friends, things that weren't funny so much as they were just cruel. People watching the show started genuinely questioning, quote, his mental capacities because he acted so insane. Peter's wife Lois changed too. In early episodes, she was patient with Peter, but would put her foot down when he went too far. She loved him despite his flaws. But in later seasons, it became pretty clear that they no longer love each other. Peter heavily hinted that he had cheated on Lois multiple times. Lois was clearly unhappy in the marriage. The relationship became depressing to watch instead of sweet and funny. Meg, the daughter, had it worst of all. In the early seasons, she was just a normal teenage girl dealing with normal problems like trying to fit in at school and being embarrassed by her parents. But the writers admitted they didn't know how to write for a teenage girl. So instead of trying to get better at it, they just made Meg into the family's whipping post. Every character would be mean to Meg for no reason. The whole family would forget she existed or openly say they wished she wasn't part of the family. It stopped being a running joke and started being genuinely uncomfortable. Stewie, the baby, went through a complete personality change. In early seasons, he was an evil genius who built weapons and time machines and wanted to kill his mother and take over the world. That was his whole character, this baby with an English accent planning world domination. But post-cancellation, that mostly went away. He became just a regular baby who happened to be smart. And a lot of jokes about him became focused on hinting that he might be gay. His entire personality got replaced. Even the minor characters became more extreme versions of themselves. Quagmire, the neighbor who was always interested in women, became someone whose creepiness and inappropriate behavior increased to disturbing levels. The show would have him do things that weren't funny, just gross and criminal. Chris, the son, had his mental faculties significantly wane, meaning he got dumber and dumber until he could barely function. There's actually a word for this that comes from The Simpsons. It's called flanderization, named after the character Ned Flanders, who started as a nice, religious neighbor and eventually became nothing but religious. It's when writers take one trait of a character and make it bigger and bigger until that's all the character is. Family Guy did this to almost everyone in the cast. Seth MacFarlane himself said something in 2009 that helps explain why the show changed. He told a reporter that Family Guy tends to be very liberal because it's written by liberals. This was the first time he really came out and admitted that the show had a political point of view. He wasn't pretending anymore that the show made fun of everyone equally. He was saying directly, we're liberals and the show reflects our politics. This honesty about the show's politics made the comedy different. When you think you're making fun of everyone, you try to be balanced. But when you admit you're coming from one side, you stop worrying as much about balance. The show started going after conservative politicians, religious people, and traditional values much harder than it went after liberal ideas. The show also developed a weird relationship with itself. It started making jokes about how lazy its own writing had become. There's a famous parody on South Park where they showed Family Guy being written by manatees, big sea animals, who would randomly pick balls with words on them to create jokes. The joke was that Family Guy's humor was completely random and required no thought or creativity. Family Guy actually seemed proud of this criticism. Instead of trying to prove South Park wrong, they leaned into it. They made episodes that were even more random, with even less connection between the jokes and the story. They acted like the chaos and lack of structure was intentional and artistic, rather than just lazy writing. The cutaway gags became a much bigger part of the show. These are the random scenes that have nothing to do with the plot. Like Peter will say something reminds him of the time he met a celebrity, and then we see a made-up scene of Peter meeting that celebrity. In early seasons, there might be 5 or 6 of these per episode. After the cancellation, some episodes had 20 or more. Entire episodes would barely have a plot because they were just stringing together random cutaways. Critics said the show had lost all semblance of reality. It used to be that the stories, while exaggerated, could theoretically happen to a real family. Post-cancellation, the show stopped even pretending to be realistic. Characters would die and come back to life with no explanation. The family would travel through time or to alternate dimensions. Events from one episode would be completely forgotten by the next episode. One thing that really showed the change was how the show handled consequences. In early Family Guy, when Peter did something wrong, there would be consequences. He'd have to fix his mistake or learn a lesson. The family would be mad at him. Something would happen as a result of his actions. But after the show came back, characters no longer learn lessons at episode end. Peter could do something absolutely terrible, and by the next episode, everyone would have forgotten about it. This lack of consequences validates the stupidity and comedy, as critics pointed out. It was saying that Peter could be as dumb and mean as he wanted because nothing really mattered. There was no growth, no development, no reason for anything to change. The show became stuck in a loop where the same types of jokes and stories happened over and over. The resurrection also made the show more successful than it had ever been before. The ratings when it came back were much higher than they'd been during the original run. Family Guy became one of Fox's biggest hits. This success meant the network gave the creators more freedom to do whatever they wanted. And what they wanted to do was push boundaries further and further. With this new freedom and success came a different attitude toward controversy. Before the cancellation, when Fox had refused to air When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, the creators had to accept that decision. But after the show came back and became hugely successful, they had more power. They could fight back against the network. They could make episodes that they knew would cause problems and dare Fox to stop them. The show started taking on bigger targets and being less subtle about its opinions. Where early Family Guy would make a joke about a politician and move on, later Family Guy would devote entire episodes to attacking people the creators disagreed with. The comedy became more like activism, using humor as a weapon rather than just trying to make people laugh. Money played a role too. The show was making a lot of money for Fox through advertising, merchandise, and continued DVD sales. When something is making that much money, networks are more willing to let it get away with controversial content. Fox needed Family Guy more than Family Guy needed Fox, which gave the creators leverage they'd never had before. The writers' room changed as well. Some of the original writers left and new ones came in. The new writers had grown up watching shows like South Park that were intentionally offensive and politically charged. They thought that's what adult animation was supposed to be: shocking, gross, and politically aggressive. So that's what they wrote. But there was also a defensiveness that came with the resurrection. The creators felt like they had something to prove. They'd been canceled once, which is embarrassing for anyone in television. They wanted to show that Fox had made a mistake, that the show deserved to be on the air. So they went bigger, louder, and more extreme with everything they did. This desperation to stay relevant and successful meant the show started chasing trends instead of setting them. If something was controversial in the news, Family Guy would do an episode about it within weeks. If another show did something that got attention, Family Guy would do their version of it. The show that had once felt fresh and original started feeling like it was constantly playing catch-up. Looking at the show before and after the cancellation, it's like watching two different programs. They had the same characters and the same setting, but the tone, the humor, the goals, everything is different. The first Family Guy was trying to be a smart satire of suburban American life. The second Family Guy was trying to be as shocking and offensive as possible, while also pushing political messages. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The resurrection gave the show a second life, which is something most canceled shows never get. But it also changed the show's DNA in ways that couldn't be undone. The Family Guy that came back wasn't the Family Guy that had been canceled. And nowhere would this be more obvious than in how the show started treating real politicians. Section 6. Bill and Peter's Bogus Journey, the clumsy Clinton parody. In March 2007, Family Guy aired an episode that showed just how awkward the show had become at making fun of politicians it probably agreed with. The episode was called Bill and Peter's Bogus Journey, and it featured former President Bill Clinton as a main character. This was the show's first major attempt at satirizing a Democratic president, and it didn't go well. Critics hated it, fans hated it, and even looking back years later, it stands out as one of the worst episodes the show ever made. The episode starts with Peter at an aquarium with his family. He's goofing around like he always does, and he gets attacked by an octopus. After this happens, Peter decides he needs to get in shape and starts going to the gym. While he's working out, he tries to lift something heavy and gives himself a serious hernia. A hernia is when part of your insides pushes through your muscle wall, and it's really painful. Peter ends up in the hospital. While Peter is recovering in the hospital, Bill Clinton's car breaks down right outside the Griffin house. This is such a random coincidence that it's hard to even explain why it happens. It just does because the plot needs it to. Peter goes outside to help, and he tries to lift Clinton's car without using a jack. This makes his hernia even worse, and he ends up back in the hospital. Clinton feels bad that Peter got hurt trying to help him, so he visits Peter in the hospital. He brings his saxophone and plays music to cheer Peter up. Peter is feeling depressed because getting injured made him feel old and past his prime. Clinton tells Peter that age is just a state of mind and that you can still have fun no matter how old you are. When Peter gets out of the hospital, Clinton takes him out to show him how to have a good time. They go to Chuck E. Cheese, the kids' pizza restaurant with arcade games. They play Dance Dance Revolution, which is a game where you step on arrows to music. They're having fun acting like kids, even though they're middle-aged men. This part of the episode is actually kind of wholesome and silly, in the way early Family Guy used to be. But then, things take a turn. Clinton and Peter start hanging out all the time, and their behavior gets worse and worse. They start smoking marijuana together. They get high and cause all kinds of trouble around town. In one scene, they try to steal a pig while they're stoned. The episode shows them acting like irresponsible teenagers instead of grown men with families and responsibilities. Lois gets worried that Clinton is a bad influence on Peter. She's concerned that Peter is spending all his time getting high and causing problems, instead of being a husband and father. So she decides to go talk to Clinton directly and tell him to stay away from her husband. She goes to wherever Clinton is staying to confront him about his behavior. But here's where the episode gets really uncomfortable. Instead of Lois successfully convincing Clinton to leave Peter alone, Clinton seduces Lois and they have sex. The episode treats this like it's just another wacky thing that happens, but think about what this actually is. A former president sleeping with his new friend's wife. It's a betrayal of Peter's friendship and Lois cheating on her husband. After they have sex, Clinton asks Lois for a cigar. This is a reference to the Monica Lewinsky scandal from the 1990s, when Clinton had an affair with a White House intern, and the details of their relationship involved a cigar. The show is essentially having Clinton reenact his real-life sex scandal with a cartoon character. Peter finds out that his wife slept with Clinton, and he's devastated. The man he thought was his friend betrayed him in the worst way possible. Lois feels terrible about what happened. She tries to convince Peter that he should get revenge by having sex with someone else to make them even. But Peter can't do it because he realizes he loves Lois too much. He can't cheat on her even after she cheated on him. Eventually, Peter and Lois work things out. The episode ends with them reconciling and Clinton kind of just disappearing from their lives. There's no real conclusion to the Clinton storyline. He was just there to cause problems and then he leaves. The episode doesn't have anything meaningful to say about Clinton, politics, or anything else. Now let's talk about why this episode was such a disaster. First, the portrayal of Clinton felt incredibly lazy and outdated. The episode aired in 2007, but all the jokes about Clinton felt like they were written in 1998 or 1999, right after the Lewinsky scandal. Critics at the time said the Clinton jokes stopped being funny in 2000. Making jokes about Clinton smoking pot and having affairs was already old news by 2007. The episode scored 8.05 million viewers when it first aired, which was actually a slight decrease from the previous week's episode. More importantly, the Parents Television Council, a group that frequently criticized Family Guy, called this episode the worst TV show of the week. This was a group that already didn't like Family Guy. And even by their standards, this episode was especially bad. But it wasn't just conservative critics who hated it. Regular fans on internet forums were brutal in their reviews. One person wrote, "That was one of the worst episodes of television I've ever seen." Another said, "This is American Dad pilot bad," comparing it to the terrible first episode of MacFarlane's other show. Someone else wrote, "Every Bill Clinton joke could be seen coming from a mile away." The reaction on fan sites was even harsher. People said things like, "Worst episode of Family Guy I've ever seen," and called it the worst thing I've ever seen on the show. Fans felt like the episode was lazy, unfunny, and didn't have anything new or interesting to say. The Clinton character wasn't actually Bill Clinton. It was just a collection of old stereotypes about him. Here's what makes this episode so interesting when we talk about Family Guy's politics. Bill Clinton is a Democrat. Seth MacFarlane is a Democrat. The show has always leaned liberal. So you might expect that when Family Guy made an episode about Clinton, they would either go easy on him or make fun of him in a gentle, affectionate way. But that's not what happened. Instead, the show portrayed Clinton as exactly what conservatives accused him of being in the 1990s, a drug-using, sex-obsessed person with no self-control who would betray anyone for his own pleasure. The episode shows Clinton smoking marijuana, which he famously claimed he tried but didn't inhale. It shows him having sex with Lois and asking for a cigar afterward, directly referencing the Lewinsky scandal. It shows him as selfish and irresponsible. But here's the thing. The episode doesn't feel like it's really criticizing Clinton either. It's more like the writers didn't know what to do with him. They knew they were supposed to make fun of the president because that's what comedy shows do. But they didn't want to actually say anything negative about his politics or his presidency. So they just recycled all the personal scandal stuff that everyone already knew about. The episode also has Bill Clinton voiced by Seth MacFarlane himself instead of having the real Clinton do it. According to the production notes, they asked Clinton to voice himself, but he declined. So MacFarlane did an impression instead. This is worth noting because later, when the show did an episode about Rush Limbaugh, a conservative, they actually got the real Rush Limbaugh to appear. It makes you wonder if Clinton refused because he read the script and didn't like how he was portrayed. There's a scene in the episode where Peter and Clinton make prank phone calls. Clinton calls Linda Tripp, who was the woman who exposed his affair with Monica Lewinsky, and yells at her. This is another reference to a scandal from the 1990s that had nothing to do with anything happening in 2007. The episode is completely stuck in the past. The episode was written by Steve Callahan, who had been with Family Guy since the beginning, and directed by Dominic Polcino. These were experienced people who had made good episodes before. But according to the DVD commentary, they had a really hard time with this episode. Seth MacFarlane said they tried to come up with a funny scene set in an aquarium and made 5 or 6 different versions, but none of them were entertaining enough to use. The show creator admitted they, quote, suffered a lot of trouble trying to make this episode work. That struggle shows in the final product. The episode feels stitched together from different ideas that don't connect. The aquarium scene at the beginning has almost nothing to do with the Clinton plot. There's a side story about Brian and Stewie trying to potty train that gets dropped halfway through with no conclusion. Critics pointed out that the episode spent way too much time on unfunny cutaway gags. These are the random flashbacks that Family Guy is famous for, where Peter will say something reminds him of something else, and we see an unrelated scene. One review said the main storyline ends up taking a back seat to an overabundance of unfunny manatee jokes. The actual Clinton plot kept getting interrupted by random jokes that had nothing to do with anything. The episode also featured 2 long segments with country music singer Conway Twitty. The show would just cut to footage of Conway Twitty performing songs for what felt like forever. These weren't parodies or jokes, they were just actual Conway Twitty performances. Seth MacFarlane said on the commentary that he loves these scenes, but most viewers found them annoying and saw them as the writers padding out the episode because they didn't have enough actual content. Looking back, this episode is important because it shows that Family Guy couldn't really satirize liberal politicians effectively. The show wanted to be edgy and make fun of a president, but they didn't want to say anything about Clinton's actual policies or political legacy. They didn't mention anything he did as president that actually mattered. Instead, they just made the same tired jokes about his personal scandals that late-night comedians had been making for almost a decade. Compare this to how the show would later treat conservative politicians. When they made episodes about Republicans, the show would go after their policies, their intelligence, their values, everything. But with Clinton, they just made him a cartoon character who liked sex and drugs. There was no bite to it, no real criticism, nothing that felt like it came from a point of view. The episode also shows how Family Guy handled celebrity guest stars who weren't actually there. Since Clinton didn't voice himself, the character doesn't feel real. It's just MacFarlane doing a silly voice saying things he imagines Clinton would say. When the show later got real politicians to voice themselves, those episodes felt more grounded because the actual person was involved. Fans online debated whether this episode proved Family Guy was actually balanced because it made fun of a Democrat, or whether it proved the show didn't know how to be funny about people it agreed with politically. Some people said, at least they're making fun of both sides. But others pointed out that making bad jokes about Clinton wasn't the same as being balanced. It was just being lazy. The episode received an IGN review score of 7.1 out of 10, which is pretty low for Family Guy at that time. The reviewer wrote, Bill and Peter's bogus journey has a few truly hilarious moments, but the main storyline ends up taking a back seat to an overabundance of unfunny manatee jokes. Even the positive part of that review is pretty weak. A few. Hilarious moments means most of it wasn't hilarious. What this episode really showed is that Family Guy was better at being angry than being clever. When the show had a target it wanted to destroy, it could be sharp and biting, but when it tried to gently mock someone without actually saying anything meaningful, the humor fell flat. The show needed an enemy to be funny, and Clinton wasn't enough of an enemy for the writers who mostly agreed with him politically. The episode title is a reference to a movie called Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which was a comedy from the early 1990s. Even the title was dated and referencing something from years earlier. Everything about this episode felt like it was stuck in the past, unable to say anything relevant about the present. This Clinton episode was Family Guy's first real test of whether it could mock politicians from both parties equally. It failed that test pretty badly. The episode wasn't funny, wasn't smart, and didn't have anything to say. It was just recycling old jokes and hoping people would laugh because Clinton was involved. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But if the show struggled to make fun of a moderate Democrat like Clinton, it would have even bigger problems when it tried to tackle something more controversial. The question of whether God exists at all. Section 7. Not all dogs go to heaven. When atheism became dogma. In March 2009, Family Guy aired what might be its most controversial episode ever. It wasn't controversial because it was gross or violent. It was controversial because it took a very strong position on religion and atheism, and it did it in the meanest, most heavy-handed way possible. The episode was called Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, and even the creator, Seth MacFarlane, admitted years later that they messed it up badly. The episode starts at a Star Trek convention. For those who don't know, Star Trek is a science fiction show with incredibly devoted fans who dress up in costumes and attend conventions to celebrate the show. Peter takes his family to one of these conventions in Quahog. While they're there, Meg gets pushed into someone who has the mumps. The mumps is a contagious disease that makes your face swell up and makes you feel terrible. Meg hasn't gotten her mumps vaccination shot, so she catches the disease and has to stay in bed until she gets better. Peter brings a television into her room so she won't be bored, but the TV only gets one channel, the religion channel. On this channel, there's a guy named Kirk Cameron preaching about God and Christianity. Kirk Cameron is a real actor who became a born-again Christian and makes religious content in real life, so the show is making fun of an actual person. Meg is stuck watching this religious programming for days because she can't get out of bed and the TV only gets that one channel. After watching hours and hours of Kirk Cameron talking about God, Meg becomes a born-again Christian. This means she has a powerful religious experience and dedicates her life to Jesus. She becomes really intense about it, wanting to spread the word of God to everyone she knows. Meg starts trying to convert everyone in the family to Christianity. She talks about Jesus constantly. She wants everyone to come to church with her. She's very enthusiastic and won't take no for an answer. When she tries to convert Brian the dog, something unexpected happens. Brian tells her he's an atheist. An atheist is someone who doesn't believe God exists. The family is shocked. Peter, Lois, Chris, and even baby Stewie are all horrified that Brian doesn't believe in God. They start treating him differently immediately. Peter tells Brian, "Shut up, beast. I have dominion over you, and I command you to believe in God." Chris says, "You're not going to get anything for Christmas, Brian." The whole family turns against him just for admitting he's an atheist. Brian tries to explain his position. He says, "I'm sorry, I just don't see any evidence. I mean, look at the Hubble telescope. It's discovered untold wonders of a vast, unexplored universe, but not one picture of a guy with a beard sitting around on a cloud." This is Brian's main argument against God, that scientists have looked out into space and never found any physical evidence that God exists. This is actually a pretty weak argument when you think about it. Most religious people don't believe God is literally sitting on a cloud in outer space where a telescope could photograph him. They believe God exists in a different way that can't be measured by scientific instruments. But the show presents Brian's argument like it's brilliant, and religious people just can't handle the truth. Meg gets really upset that Brian won't convert to Christianity. She tries over and over to change his mind, but Brian refuses. So Meg does something terrible. She tells the local news that Brian is an atheist. A news reporter named Tom Tucker announces, "Good evening, I'm Tom Tucker. Our top story tonight, just when you thought the world couldn't be any more dangerous, Channel 5 News has discovered that there is an atheist among us." The entire town of Quahog turns against Brian. People throw things at him. They chase him out of stores, they won't serve him in restaurants. Most importantly for Brian, every liquor store and bar in town refuses to sell him alcohol. Remember, Brian is an alcoholic who drinks constantly, so not being able to buy alcohol is a huge problem for him. Brian tries to go about his normal life, but everywhere he goes, people are horrible to him. He tries to rent a movie, they throw him out. He tries to buy cigarettes, they throw him out. He can't do anything without being harassed and attacked. The episode is showing how terrible it is to persecute someone for their beliefs. So far, the episode seems to be making a good point about religious tolerance. But then, Brian starts getting desperate for alcohol. He's an alcoholic, and he's going through withdrawal. He starts hallucinating, seeing visions of beer bottles and wine glasses begging him to drink them. He's suffering badly. So Brian decides to fake it. He pretends to believe in God, just so people will stop persecuting him and he can buy alcohol again. Meg is thrilled that Brian has found God. She takes him to participate in the work of the Lord. But what is this work? It's a book burning. A large group of Christians have gathered to burn books they think are, quote, harmful to God. Meg and the others are throwing books into a fire and cheering as they burn. What books are they burning? The episode shows them destroying The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, which is the famous book about evolution. They burn A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, which is about physics and cosmology. They even burn a book called Logic for First Graders, suggesting that religious people are against children learning how to think logically. Brian sees this book burning and realizes he can't keep pretending. He confronts Meg and tells her that he can't be part of this. Meg asks what he's talking about. He said he found God. Brian tells her that he lied. He only pretended to believe so he could get alcohol. He's still an atheist. Then Brian says something really cruel to Meg. He tells her, if there was a God, would he give you a smoking hot mom like Lois and then have you grow up looking like Peter? He's saying that if God existed and God was loving, Meg wouldn't be ugly. He continues, "And what kind of God would put you in a house where no one respects or cares about you?" Brian is using Meg's pain as proof that God doesn't exist. Meg is the most bullied, ignored, and mistreated person in the family. Everyone is mean to her constantly, and Brian is saying this proves there's no God because a loving God wouldn't let Meg suffer like this. It's an incredibly mean thing to say, even if Brian thinks he's making a philosophical point. Meg breaks down crying. She feels ashamed and hurt. She apologizes to Brian for how she treated him. She admits she doesn't know how she can feel loved if God doesn't exist. Brian tells her that the answers are inside herself, and the real meaning of existence is out there somewhere. They have to find it on their own. Now here's where things get weird. The episode ends with a revelation that the entire Family Guy universe exists inside the molecules of a lampshade in the bedroom shared by Adam West and Rob Lowe. Adam West is the mayor of Quahog in the show, and Rob Lowe is a famous actor. This ending is completely random and has nothing to do with anything that happened in the episode. It's just bizarre. Meanwhile, there's a completely separate storyline about Stewie kidnapping the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation. He's mad that he didn't get to ask them questions at the convention, so he builds a working transporter, like from Star Trek, and beams them to Quahog. He forces them to spend the day with him, and they're all miserable. He even kills one of them to show he's serious. This storyline is supposed to be funny, but mostly just feels mean. Now let's talk about why this episode was such a disaster. On the DVD commentary for this episode, Seth MacFarlane and the other writers admitted they messed up. MacFarlane said they were trying to be as even-handed as they could with the whole religion versus atheism argument, but they came off a little heavy-handed and regret how the episode turned out. The episode was criticized for being a soapbox for Seth MacFarlane to preach atheism. People felt like MacFarlane was using the show to push his personal religious views instead of making good comedy. And here's the thing. Critics from all sides agreed the episode failed. Religious people thought it was mean to religion. Atheists thought it made atheism look bad because Brian's arguments were so weak and he was so cruel to Meg. Think about Brian's evidence against God. He says the Hubble telescope hasn't photographed God. He says Meg is ugly and unloved, so God must not exist. These aren't serious philosophical arguments. These are shallow, mean-spirited talking points. If the show wanted to actually explore atheism seriously, they could have had Brian make better arguments. But they didn't. The episode also portrays religious people as book-burning, anti-intellectual bullies. The Christians in the episode are shown destroying science books and logic textbooks. They're portrayed as people who hate thinking and learning. This is a stereotype of religious people that doesn't match reality. Plenty of religious people value education and science. But the episode doesn't portray atheists well either. Brian is shown as a hypocrite who only pretends to find God so he can get alcohol. He's cruel to Meg, using her insecurities as weapons. He's smug and superior. Even though the show seems to agree with Brian's atheism, it makes him look terrible as a person. Critics said the episode was boring and formulaic. The AV Club, a popular entertainment website, gave the episode a C grade. They wrote that the writers have no idea how to best use Meg as a character. Even putting aside the religious controversy, the episode just wasn't very funny or well written. One interesting note, the episode heavily advertised the Star Trek storyline in its promotions. Most summaries and TV guides talked about Stewie meeting the Star Trek cast as if that was the main plot. This was clearly because the network knew the Brian atheism storyline was controversial and would turn people off. They tried to hide it by promoting the Star Trek guest stars instead. The episode also shows Brian hallucinating when he can't get alcohol. He sees beer bottles and wine glasses with faces, talking to him and begging him to drink them. This should be portrayed as sad and serious. Brian has a real addiction problem. But the episode plays it mostly for laughs. The show doesn't treat Brian's alcoholism as the serious issue it is. People who study Family Guy have pointed out that this episode shows how the show had changed. Early Family Guy would have shown both sides of the religion debate and made fun of extremists on both sides. But this episode clearly picks a side. It agrees with Brian's atheism, even while showing that Brian is kind of a jerk about it. The book burning scene is especially telling. Book burning is associated with Nazis and totalitarian governments. It's one of the most evil things you can show people doing. By having the Christians burn books, the episode is comparing religious people to Nazis. That's not subtle satire. That's just calling religious people evil. Meg's conversion to Christianity is also portrayed as a bad thing that happens because she's sick and vulnerable. She only becomes religious because she's stuck in bed watching religious TV. The implication is that religion preys on weak, suffering people. Nobody in the episode becomes religious through thoughtful consideration or genuine spiritual experience. It only happens because Meg is trapped and brainwashed. The episode aired on March 29, 2009, and got a 4.8 out of 7 Nielsen rating. That's okay, but not great. More importantly, the episode got terrible reviews from viewers. On fan websites, people called it one of the worst Family Guy episodes ever. Both religious viewers and atheist viewers felt like the episode was insulting to them. Some people defended the episode by saying it was brave to take on religion on network television. They argued that shows are usually too scared to criticize religion, so Family Guy should be praised for having the courage to do it. But bravery doesn't matter if the execution is bad. You can tackle controversial topics and still make good comedy. This episode failed to do that. The episode's title is a reference to an animated movie called All Dogs Go to Heaven. By changing it to Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, the show is saying that Brian the dog won't go to heaven because he's an atheist. It's a cute play on words, but it also kind of undermines the episode's message. If heaven doesn't exist like Brian claims, then the title doesn't make sense. Looking back at this episode, what's most striking is how seriously it takes itself. Family Guy is usually a silly show that doesn't care about being meaningful. But this episode really wants to make a point about religion. It wants to convince you that atheism is right and religion is wrong. And in trying so hard to make that point, it forgets to be funny. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The episode also revealed something important about Seth MacFarlane's approach to the show. He was willing to use Family Guy as a platform for his personal beliefs, even if it made for bad television. He cared more about the message than the comedy. And that priority would become even more obvious when the show tried to present both sides of politics. Section 8. Excellence in Broadcasting. The Rush Limbaugh Experiment. In October 2010, Family Guy tried something unusual. The show decided to do an episode where Brian, the liberal dog who we all know pushes progressive politics, temporarily becomes a conservative Republican. The episode was called Excellence in Broadcasting, which is a reference to Rush Limbaugh's radio program. Rush Limbaugh was one of the most famous conservative talk radio hosts in America until his death in 2021. And in this episode, Limbaugh himself agreed to voice his own character. The setup for the episode is pretty simple. Brian is at a bookstore when he sees that Rush Limbaugh is there doing a book signing. Brian, being the liberal he is, decides to confront Limbaugh. He goes up to him and starts arguing about politics, but instead of getting into a fight, Limbaugh is actually really nice to Brian. He's friendly and calm, and he asks Brian if he's actually read any of Limbaugh's books. Brian admits he hasn't read them. He just knows he disagrees with Limbaugh based on what he's heard about him. Limbaugh suggests that Brian should actually read one of his books before judging him. He gives Brian a free copy and encourages him to give it a fair chance. Brian takes the book home, planning to read it just so he can find things to criticize. But something weird happens. As Brian reads the book, he starts to agree with it. The conservative arguments Limbaugh makes actually start to make sense to Brian. This is supposed to be shocking, because Brian is usually so strongly liberal. But the book convinces him, and Brian has a complete change of heart. He decides to become a Republican. Brian starts acting like a completely different person. He talks about conservative values constantly. He criticizes liberals and makes fun of progressive ideas. He wears Republican pins and buttons. He becomes exactly the kind of person he used to argue against. The family is confused and disturbed by this change, but Brian is totally committed to his new political identity. Brian becomes so devoted to conservatism that he becomes roommates with Rush Limbaugh himself. They move in together, and Brian follows Limbaugh everywhere. He's like an obsessed fan who won't leave his hero alone. At first, Limbaugh seems okay with it, but Brian takes it way too far. He becomes annoying and clingy, showing up everywhere Limbaugh goes. The episode includes a musical number called Republican Town, where Brian sings about all the Republican values and politicians he now supports. The song makes fun of various political figures from both parties. It shows former Vice President Dick Cheney, former Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. It also features actors who are known for being conservative, like Mickey Rourke, Chuck Norris, and Jon Voight. The song mentions Angelina Jolie by referring to Jon Voight's daughter, who was pretty hot at one time. The song is a parody of The Company Way from a Broadway musical called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. It's one of those big, showy musical numbers that Family Guy does sometimes, but it's clearly making fun of Republicans more than celebrating them. As the episode goes on, Brian becomes more and more obnoxious about his conservative views. He won't stop talking about politics. He argues with everyone he meets. He's preachy and annoying, which is ironic because that's exactly how Brian acts when he's liberal. The show is basically admitting that Brian is insufferable, no matter what his politics are. Eventually, Rush Limbaugh gets sick of Brian following him around constantly. Brian has become too much. Limbaugh decides he needs to get rid of Brian, so he does something clever. He reveals to everyone that Brian isn't really a conservative. He exposes Brian's true political convictions, showing that Brian is still actually a liberal deep down. He's just been pretending, or confused. This revelation breaks the spell. Brian realizes that conservatism isn't really for him after all. He goes back to being his normal, liberal self. The episode ends with everything returning to how it was before, as if nothing had really changed. Brian learned no real lessons, and the episode doesn't have much to say except, Brian tried being conservative and it didn't work out. The episode aired on October 3rd, 2010. And got 7.94 million viewers. It also got a 2.8 rating in the important 18 to 49 age group, which is the demographic that advertisers care most about. These weren't terrible numbers, but they were slightly lower than what Family Guy usually got at that time. The episode did beat American Dad and The Cleveland Show, which were MacFarlane's other shows that aired the same night. But the real problem was the critical reception. The reviews were brutal. The AV Club, a popular entertainment website, gave the episode a grade of D, which is the second worst possible grade. The reviewer wrote that most of the episode was spent justifying its existence as a Rush Limbaugh episode of Family Guy, and that the episode failed to do that. Critics called the episode funny but toothless. What this means is that even though there were some jokes that made people laugh, the episode didn't have any real bite to it. It didn't say anything meaningful about politics or conservatism. It was just, look at Brian being conservative, isn't that weird? For 20 minutes. The episode was supposed to show that Family Guy could make fun of both political sides equally. Seth MacFarlane had announced this episode in an interview back in August 2009, more than a year before it aired. In that interview with The Hollywood Reporter, MacFarlane admitted something important. He said, Family Guy tends to be very liberal because it's written by liberals. This was the first time MacFarlane openly admitted the show had a political bias. He wasn't pretending anymore that the show was balanced, but then he explained how they planned to handle the Rush Limbaugh episode. MacFarlane said, "We put it out there to a lot of Republicans. We're doing this show, who wants in? And we got some bites. So they asked various conservative figures if they wanted to be in the episode, and Limbaugh agreed. Getting the real Rush Limbaugh to voice himself was a big deal. It meant the episode had a level of authenticity it wouldn't have had if they just made fun of a cartoon version of him. Limbaugh actually read the script and agreed to participate, which suggested he thought the episode would be fair to him and his views. But here's the problem with the episode. It never actually engages with conservative ideas seriously. Brian becomes conservative not because he has legitimate reasons or because he's convinced by good arguments. He becomes conservative because he reads one book and gets temporarily brainwashed. The episode treats conservatism like a phase Brian is going through, not like a legitimate political philosophy. The episode also makes Brian super annoying when he's conservative. He's pushy, aggressive, and won't stop talking about his new beliefs. The message seems to be, this is what conservatives are like, obnoxious people who won't shut up about politics. Even though Brian acts the exact same way when he's liberal, the episode frames it as something specifically wrong with being conservative. When Limbaugh exposes Brian at the end, it's presented as Brian's true beliefs being revealed. The show is saying that Brian is naturally liberal, and being conservative was just a fake persona he put on. This suggests that liberalism is authentic and conservatism is artificial, at least for smart, educated people like Brian. The episode also doesn't show Brian learning anything from his experience. He doesn't come away thinking conservatives have some good points too, or I understand the other side better now. He just goes back to being exactly who he was before. The whole episode was essentially pointless, except to show that Brian tried conservatism and it didn't stick. Critics pointed out that the show had done much better political humor in the past, The review praised Family Guy for its past political humor, but said this episode failed to live up to that standard. It felt like the writers were trying to prove they could be balanced, but they didn't really commit to it. The Republican Town song is a good example of this half-hearted approach. While it mentions politicians from both parties, it's clearly making fun of Republicans more than Democrats. The way the conservatives are drawn and portrayed is more unflattering. The lyrics poke more fun at Republican figures. Even when trying to be balanced, the show's bias shows through. Some conservatives praised the episode for at least trying to present their viewpoint, even if imperfectly. They appreciated that Limbaugh was portrayed as intelligent and friendly rather than as an angry villain. They liked that he was shown calmly making his case to Brian instead of screaming at him. But they also noticed that the episode ultimately dismissed conservative ideas as something Brian would naturally reject. Liberal viewers had mixed reactions too. Some thought the episode was too soft on Limbaugh and conservatism. They didn't like seeing Brian temporarily become conservative, even as a joke. Others appreciated that the show at least acknowledged that conservative ideas exist, and that some people find them convincing, even if those people are wrong. The episode reveals something important about Family Guy's approach to politics. The show wanted credit for being balanced without actually being balanced. They wanted to say, look, we made fun of both sides, while still making it clear which side they thought was right. It's like they were trying to have it both ways. The decision to have Limbaugh voice himself was smart from a production standpoint. It gave the episode legitimacy and made it harder for conservatives to complain that they were being unfairly portrayed. Limbaugh agreed to participate, so he must have been okay with how he was shown, right? It was a clever way to protect the show from criticism. But it also meant the show had to be somewhat nicer to Limbaugh than they might have been otherwise. They couldn't make him a complete monster because he was actually in the recording booth performing the lines. This limited how hard they could go after him, which is probably why critics called the episode toothless. The episode aired during a time when American politics was getting more and more divided. The Tea Party movement had emerged in 2009, pushing the Republican Party further right. Barack Obama was president, and conservatives were organizing strong opposition to his policies. The country was already splitting into two camps that couldn't talk to each other. In this environment, an episode about a liberal becoming conservative temporarily could have been meaningful. It could have shown people trying to understand each other across political lines. It could have demonstrated that both sides have legitimate concerns. But Family Guy didn't do any of that. Instead, they made an episode where conservatism was just a weird phase Brian went through before returning to normal. The episode also continued the pattern of Brian being the character through which the show expressed its political views. Every time Family Guy wanted to make a political point, they used Brian to make it. This had the effect of making Brian less of a character and more of a mouthpiece. He stopped being interesting because you knew exactly what he would say about any political topic. Looking back at excellence in broadcasting, it feels like a missed opportunity. The show had Rush Limbaugh, one of the most influential conservative voices in America, willing to participate in their episode. They could have created a genuine dialogue about political differences. Instead, they made an episode that basically said, Brian tried being conservative and it was wrong for him. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The episode proved that even when Family Guy tried to be balanced, it couldn't help revealing its bias. And if they couldn't be fair when they were actively trying, there was no hope they'd be balanced when they stopped trying altogether. The Trump presidency would show just how one-sided the show could really be. Section 9. Trump Guy. The Point of No Return. In January 2019, Family Guy did something it had never done before. It devoted an entire episode to attacking a sitting president. The episode was called Trump Guy, and it marked the moment when the show completely gave up on pretending to be balanced. This wasn't satire anymore. This was the show picking a side and fighting a battle. And whether you agreed with the show's politics or not, almost everyone agreed the episode wasn't very funny. The episode was actually the second part of a two-part story. The first part, called Hefty Shades of Grey, showed Peter's hair turning white, which led to him getting a job as a news reporter. In that job, Peter started making up fake news stories and saying whatever he wanted on television. At the end of that episode, Peter got fired for spreading lies. But then something unexpected happened. President Donald Trump called Peter on the phone. Trump had been watching Peter on TV and loved everything he did. He loved that Peter was making up stories and saying outrageous things. Trump thought Peter was exactly the kind of person he needed working for him. So he offered Peter a job as his press secretary, which is the person who talks to reporters and represents the president to the media. Peter accepted, and the family moved to Washington, D.C. Trump Guy picks up with the Griffin family already living in the nation's capital. Peter is working at the White House, and Trump gives him a tour of the building. Trump's first assignment for Peter is to check every doorknob in the White House for static electricity. Peter touches one and gets shocked. When Trump shakes Peter's hand to thank him, Trump gets shocked too, and his hair frizzles out in all directions. The episode makes constant jokes about Trump's appearance. They show him as extremely overweight, even more so than Peter. They draw him with an orange face from spray tan. They emphasize how small his hands are. They give him a ridiculous blonde hairstyle that sticks way out in front of his face. Every aspect of his design is meant to make him look as ugly and stupid as possible. Meg gets introduced to Trump's daughter Ivanka, who gives Meg a makeover and plastic surgery. Suddenly, Meg becomes attractive by Washington, D.C. standards, which is the show's way of saying she's still not that pretty. But then Ivanka leaves Meg alone with Donald Trump, and something horrible happens. Trump grabs Meg inappropriately between her legs. This is a direct reference to the Access Hollywood tape that came out during the 2016 election, where Trump was recorded saying he could grab women by the pissy because he was famous. The show is recreating this real scandal with their cartoon character. Meg is shocked and horrified. She runs to tell her family what happened, but nobody believes her at first. They think she must be exaggerating or misunderstanding what happened. But then Trump tries to do it again. And this time, the whole family sees it. Lois, Peter, Brian, Chris, and Stewie all witness Trump assaulting Meg. There's no doubt about what he's doing. Peter is disgusted by what he saw. He quits his job as press secretary right there on the spot. He tells his family that he wants to be a better man, a kinder person who doesn't act like Trump. He makes a promise to change his behavior and be more respectful. But Peter being Peter, he can't keep this promise for very long. Within hours, he's back to his old, rude, obnoxious ways. Trump sees Peter breaking his promise and decides to rub it in his face. Trump tells Peter that they're not that different. They're both rude, they both say whatever they want, they both treat people badly. Trump brings up a time when Peter made fun of another cartoon show called Bob's Burgers. Then Trump says Bob's Burgers is his favorite animated show, which is the show's way of making a joke about the Emmy Awards. This makes Peter furious. He's sick of being compared to Trump. So Peter does what Peter always does when he's angry. He starts a fight. Peter and Trump begin punching each other right there in the White House. And this fight doesn't end quickly. It goes on for several minutes, becoming one of those extended fight scenes that Family Guy is known for. The fight moves through the entire White House. They crash through walls and destroy furniture. They interrupt a press conference where Mike Pence is speaking. Congress members stop their work to watch the fight, cheering whenever their preferred fighter lands a punch. Republicans cheer for Trump, Democrats cheer for Peter. The fight turns into a symbol of America's political division. Peter and Trump keep fighting as they move outside the White House. They run through the streets of Washington, D.C., still punching each other. Eventually, they make their way to the Smithsonian Institution, which is a famous museum. They each steal an old airplane from the museum exhibits and start flying them at each other. The planes crash into each other in midair and somehow end up balanced on top of the Washington Monument, which is the tall, pointy tower in Washington, D.C. Both Peter and Trump are hanging on for dear life, about to fall to their deaths. Peter tries to grab Trump's hand to save himself, but Trump's hands are drawn so small that Peter can't get a grip. Trump tries to reach down and grab Peter, but his hand slips, and they both start falling toward the concrete below. They're about to die when suddenly they land on something soft, an industrial air mattress. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has saved them. Trudeau checks that they're both okay and then leaves without saying much. Peter and Trump, having nearly died together, decide to make peace. They reconcile in the sunset and agree to move on from their fight. The Griffins go home to Quahog, happy to be away from Washington and Trump. But the episode isn't over yet. There's one more scene that shows what the episode was really about. In the final scene, the Griffin family breaks the fourth wall. This means they talk directly to the audience watching the show. They list all the terrible things Donald Trump has done as president. They encourage viewers to read the Steele dossier, which is a controversial document about Trump's connections to Russia. The family is directly telling people watching to oppose Trump and learn about his alleged crimes. This ending proves that Trump Guy wasn't really a comedy episode. It was political activism disguised as comedy. The writers weren't trying to make people laugh. They were trying to convince people that Trump was evil and dangerous. Whether you agree with that message or not, it's not what most people tune into Family Guy expecting to see. The episode got 4.04 million viewers when it first aired. That was the lowest rating in its time slot that night. It did better than American Dad and The Cleveland Show, but it lost to The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers. For a show as popular as Family Guy, these were disappointing numbers. People didn't want to watch this episode. The critical reviews were brutal. Critics called the episode unfunny, lazy, and one-sided. One review said, "I was watching this expecting some banter going back and forth between liberals and conservative views the way South Park does it. Instead, we got just 20 minutes of the same orange man dumb jokes we hear on every talk show." Another critic wrote, "Several of the lines weren't even jokes, just the characters speaking into the camera about scandals." This is an important observation. The episode didn't have actual comedy in many parts. It had characters listing facts about Trump's presidency and expecting that to be funny just because it was about Trump. Fans were divided, but even people who hated Trump often admitted the episode wasn't good. Some reviews said things like, "Not funny, can't put it any plainer than that, not funny." Others pointed out that South Park had done political episodes about Trump that were actually clever and funny, while Family Guy just did the obvious jokes everyone had already heard. Conservative viewers were angry, which was expected. But liberal viewers were disappointed too, because the episode was so lazy. One review said, "If you're going to do something like this, do it tastefully." The jokes were unfunny, stagnant, and just plain old. The episode managed to upset people who agreed with its politics because it was so poorly executed. Some people defended the episode. One Canadian viewer wrote, "The writers went ahead and said everything we were all thinking for the longest time. Trump is a joke and deserves to be made fun of." A few reviews praised the episode for being brave enough to take on Trump directly. But even positive reviews admitted the episode wasn't particularly clever or original. The show's creators tried to defend their choice to make this episode. Rich Appel, one of the producers, explained to Entertainment Weekly how they decided to include the sexual assault scene with Meg. He said, "If I say the words Donald Trump to you, what's the first thing you think?" He was saying that Trump's "grab her by the pissy" comment was so famous that they had to reference it. Appel continued, "The only point in using Meg was to show that men like Trump can attempt to prey on vulnerable people." So they knew they were making a serious point about sexual assault, but they were making it in a cartoon comedy show, which is a weird choice for such a serious topic. The other producer, Alex Sulkin, tried to claim the show was balanced. He said, "We've made fun of the Clintons and Barack Obama." He was trying to argue that Family Guy makes fun of both parties equally, but anyone who watched the show knew that wasn't true. The Bill Clinton episode from 2007 was weak and unfunny. The Trump episode was aggressive and meant to do damage. What makes this episode so significant is that it came out in January 2019, when Trump still had 2 more years left in his presidency. The show wasn't looking back at a completed presidency and offering commentary. It was actively trying to influence people's opinions about a sitting president. That's not satire. That's propaganda. The episode also marked a shift in how Family Guy saw itself. The show used to be about a family in Rhode Island having silly adventures. Now, it was about using that family as a vehicle to attack political enemies. The Griffins weren't characters anymore. They were puppets for the writer's political messages. Fans noticed that the fight scene between Peter and Trump was almost identical to the many fights Peter has had with a giant chicken throughout the series. It was the same choreography, the same style, just with Trump instead of the chicken. The show was recycling its own material because it cared more about the message than the creativity. The episode's conclusion, where the family tells viewers to read the Steele dossier, was especially controversial. The dossier was a political document with unverified claims about Trump. By promoting it, the show was taking sides in an active political controversy. This wasn't comedy commentary, it was political activism. Looking back, Trump Guy represents the moment Family Guy completely abandoned any pretense of balance. The show had always leaned liberal, but it used to at least try to make fun of both sides. After this episode, that pretense was gone. The show was openly partisan, and it didn't care who knew it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But this episode didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a bigger pattern of Family Guy attacking the network that aired it, creating a bizarre situation where the show was biting the hand that fed it. Section 10. Biting the hand that feeds. Family Guy versus Fox News. There's something really weird about Family Guy's relationship with Fox. The show airs on the Fox broadcast network, which means Fox pays for the show to be made and gives it a time slot on television. Fox is the reason Family Guy exists and the reason Seth MacFarlane became rich and famous. But despite all of this, Family Guy spent years attacking Fox News, which is owned by the same parent company as the Fox broadcast network. It's like the show was insulting its own boss. This strange situation shows how complicated media companies can be. The Fox broadcast network and Fox News are technically separate things, even though they're owned by the same people. The broadcast network shows entertainment like Family Guy, The Simpsons, and sports. Fox News is a cable news channel that's known for having conservative political opinions. But to most people watching, they're both just Fox. So when Family Guy attacks Fox News, it feels like the show is fighting with itself. The attacks on Fox News started happening more and more as the show went on. In one episode from season 7, there's a scene where Brian is talking to Lois about her job. Lois is working for Fox News in this episode, and Brian is really concerned about it. He tells her she should reconsider working there. When she asks why, Brian says directly that Fox News is evil. He accuses the network of spreading fake news. This wasn't a quick joke that the show moved past. It was Brian making a serious statement about Fox News being dishonest and harmful. The episode was making it very clear what the writers thought about the news channel. And remember, this is airing on a network owned by the same company that owns Fox News. It's incredibly bold, and also kind of awkward. The show didn't stop there. Family Guy has made multiple jokes and references criticizing Fox News over the years. They've mocked the network's hosts, made fun of its viewers, and questioned its journalistic integrity. The show has portrayed Fox News as a propaganda machine that lies to people and makes America worse. These aren't gentle jokes. They're serious accusations wrapped in comedy. Seth MacFarlane took his criticism of Fox News outside of the show, too. On September 21st, 2022, he appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live, which is a late-night talk show. During his appearance, MacFarlane spoke openly against Fox News. He criticized the network for spreading misinformation and for contributing to political division in America. He wasn't hiding behind his cartoon characters anymore. He was saying it himself, with his real face, on camera. This created a really uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. MacFarlane works for Fox. The company pays him millions of dollars. They gave him the platform that made him famous. They've supported his shows for decades. And he's using that platform and that money to attack another part of their business. Most people in his position would be too scared to do something like this, worried they'd get fired or their show would get canceled. But MacFarlane has enough power and success that he can get away with it. Family Guy makes too much money for Fox to cancel it just because MacFarlane criticizes Fox News. The show sells advertising, gets good ratings, and creates content that can be sold internationally and on streaming services. Fox needs Family Guy as much as Family Guy needs Fox, which gives MacFarlane freedom that most TV creators don't have. The show itself has acknowledged this weird situation in a self-aware way. There have been jokes about how Family Guy airs on Fox despite constantly making fun of the network. The characters will sometimes break the fourth wall and comment on the awkwardness of insulting their own network. It's like they're admitting, yes, we know this is weird, but we're going to keep doing it anyway. This criticism of Fox News fits into a bigger pattern of Family Guy becoming more openly political. In the early seasons, the show would make jokes about politics without taking strong positions. But as time went on, especially after the show came back from cancellation, it stopped pretending to be neutral. The show started using its platform to push specific political messages. Brian became the main vehicle for these political messages, as we've talked about before. And since Brian is essentially Seth MacFarlane's voice in the show, when Brian criticizes Fox News, it's really MacFarlane criticizing Fox News. The show isn't hiding its political views anymore. It's broadcasting them loudly and clearly. What makes this especially interesting is that Fox, the broadcast network, has generally let Family Guy do whatever it wants. Sure, they banned When You Wish Upon a Weinstein back in 2000, and they refused to air the abortion episode, Partial Terms of Endearment. But for the most part, they've allowed the show to be crude, offensive, and politically liberal without much interference. This suggests that the people running the Fox broadcast network either don't care what Family Guy says about Fox News, or they've decided that trying to censor the show would create more problems than it would solve. If they tried to stop Family Guy from criticizing Fox News, it would become a big news story about censorship and corporate interference. It would make Fox look bad and give the show even more attention. So instead, they just let it happen. Family Guy gets to attack Fox News. Fox News ignores Family Guy, and both continue making money for the same parent company. It's a bizarre arrangement, but it works somehow. The only people who seem bothered by it are viewers who notice the contradiction. The attacks on Fox News also show how Family Guy sees its audience. The show assumes that people watching Family Guy are liberal and agree that Fox News is bad. They're not trying to convince Fox News viewers that the network is wrong. They're preaching to the choir, telling people what they already believe. It's the same approach the show takes with most of its political content. This is very different from how the show handled politics in its early seasons. Back then, Family Guy seemed to think its audience included people with different political views. The show tried to make jokes that everyone could laugh at, regardless of their politics. But modern Family Guy has decided its audience is liberal, and it's okay to alienate conservative viewers. The Fox News criticism also reveals MacFarlane's personal frustration. He's a liberal person who works for a company that also owns a conservative news network. He makes content that promotes progressive values, but his paychecks come from a corporation that profits from conservative media too. This contradiction clearly bothers him, and he deals with it by using his show to attack the parts of the company he disagrees with. It's worth noting that other shows on Fox have also made jokes about Fox News. The Simpsons has done it. Bob's Burgers has done it. It's become almost a tradition for Fox's animated comedies to mock Fox News. But Family Guy does it more aggressively and more frequently than the others. The show doesn't just make occasional jokes. It treats Fox News as an ongoing villain. Some people see this as brave. They think MacFarlane is courageously speaking truth to power by criticizing his own employer. They appreciate that he's willing to risk his job to call out what he sees as misinformation and propaganda. They see Family Guy as one of the few shows willing to directly attack a major news network. Other people see it as hypocritical. They point out that MacFarlane happily cashes his Fox paychecks while pretending to be fighting against the company. They note that if he really thought Fox was so terrible, he could take his shows to a different network. They see his criticism as performative, doing it for show while benefiting from the system he claims to oppose. The truth is probably somewhere in between. MacFarlane genuinely disagrees with Fox News and uses his platform to say so. But he's also not willing to give up his lucrative deal with Fox to prove his principles. He's found a way to criticize the company while still working for them, and both sides have accepted this arrangement. This situation also shows how modern media companies work. They're so big and contain so many different parts that contradictions like this can exist without breaking anything. Fox can air a show that attacks Fox News because they're making money from both. The company doesn't have to have consistent political beliefs. It just has to make profits. For viewers, this creates a confusing situation. When you watch Family Guy attack Fox News, should you see it as a brave act of resistance? Or should you see it as meaningless because the same company profits either way? Does MacFarlane's criticism mean anything when he's still working for Fox? These are questions the show never really addresses. What's clear is that the Fox News criticism is part of Family Guy's evolution from entertainment to activism. The show isn't content to just make people laugh anymore. It wants to change people's minds about politics and media. It wants to convince viewers that Fox News is dangerous and that conservatism is wrong. Whether that's appropriate for a cartoon comedy is a matter of debate. The relationship between Family Guy and Fox also shows how much power successful creators can have. MacFarlane can openly criticize his employer because his shows are too valuable to lose. This is a privilege that most people in television don't have. The average TV writer or producer who attacked their own network would be fired immediately. But MacFarlane is untouchable, and he knows it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This weird arrangement would continue for years, with Family Guy attacking Fox News while airing on Fox. And this pattern of attacking institutions and people wouldn't stop there. Soon the show would turn its criticism toward everything and everyone, transforming all the characters in the process. Section 11. Flanderization and Politics. How character decay served partisan goals. There's a term that television critics use called flanderization, and it comes from The Simpsons. The character Ned Flanders started out as a friendly, helpful neighbor who happened to be religious. But over many seasons, the writers kept making him more and more religious, until that was the only thing about him. He stopped being a well-rounded character and became just the religious guy. Family Guy did this same thing to almost every character in the show, and it happened around the same time the show became more political. Let's start with Peter, since he's the main character. In the early seasons, Peter was described by critics as a relatable, if somewhat exaggerated figure, and a typical working man who loved his family and spent time with his friends in the bar. Yes, he was overweight and not very smart, but he felt like a real person. He had a job he cared about, friends he enjoyed being around, and a family he loved. He made mistakes, but he tried to fix them. But after the show came back from cancellation, Peter changed completely. Critics started describing him as unhinged and vindictive. They said he became so dumb that the audience genuinely questions his mental capacities. One review called him a darker version of his past self that was borderline disturbing to witness. Peter stopped being a lovable idiot and became someone who was genuinely cruel and possibly mentally ill. The things Peter does in later seasons aren't just dumb, they're evil. He tortures his daughter Meg for no reason. He abuses his friends. He destroys property and hurts people and doesn't care about the consequences. Early Peter would do something stupid, realize he messed up, and try to make it right. Later Peter does terrible things on purpose and feels no guilt about it. This change in Peter served the show's political goals in a specific way. When Peter became a complete moron, the show could use him to represent everything wrong with America. Peter became a symbol of ignorant conservative values, even though the show never explicitly said Peter was conservative. He was just shown as stupid, mean, and resistant to change. All things the show wanted viewers to associate with people who disagreed with the show's politics. Meg's transformation was even worse. In early seasons, she was just a normal teenage girl dealing with normal problems. She wanted to be popular at school, she was embarrassed by her parents, she had crushes on boys. She was basically every teenage girl from every TV show ever made. The writers admitted this was the problem. They didn't know how to write for a teenage girl, since the writing staff was mostly men. So instead of learning how to write for Meg, they just gave up. They turned her into what critics called the family's whipping post. Every character in the show became incredibly mean to Meg for no reason. Her own family would forget she existed. Peter would openly say he wished Meg wasn't his daughter. Lois would join in on mocking her. Even baby Stewie would insult her. This constant abuse of Meg stopped being funny and started being uncomfortable. The show would have entire scenes where the only joke was everyone being horrible to Meg. She became a punching bag, and the audience was supposed to laugh at her suffering. Some episodes would have Meg trying to stand up for herself, only to be beaten down again. The message was clear. Meg deserves to be treated badly. The treatment of Meg actually connects the show's political evolution. Remember the feminism episode, I Am Peter, Hear Me Roar? That episode showed the writers didn't know how to handle female characters who demanded respect. Meg became another example of this. Instead of writing her as a real person with real feelings, they made her a joke. It revealed how the show actually felt about women, regardless of what political positions it claimed to support. Stewie's change was probably the most dramatic. In early seasons, Stewie was an evil genius baby who wanted to kill his mother and take over the world. He built weapons and time machines. He had plans for world domination. He spoke with a fancy English accent and acted like a villain from a James Bond movie. That was his entire character, and it was funny because it was absurd. A baby acting like an evil mastermind. But post-cancellation, Stewie became completely different. He stopped wanting to kill Lois. He stopped trying to take over the world. He stopped building weapons. Instead, the show started making jokes about Stewie being gay. More and more of his character became focused on hinting that he was attracted to men, which is weird because he's supposed to be a baby. Stewie went from having a clear, funny character trait to just being, quote, the gay baby. Chris, the son, had his, quote, mental faculties significantly wane, according to critics. This is a fancy way of saying he got dumber and dumber until he could barely function. Early Chris was slow but sweet. He had interests and hobbies. He tried his best, even though he wasn't very bright. Later, Chris became so stupid that he couldn't complete basic tasks. He lost all personality except being dumb. Even minor characters went through this process. Quagmire, the sex-obsessed neighbor, started out as a guy who really liked women. It was creepy, but played for laughs. But over time, his creepiness and inappropriate behavior increased, to the point where he wasn't funny anymore. He was just a criminal. The show would have him do things that were actually illegal and disturbing, not amusing. Here's why this all matters for understanding the show's politics. When characters become one-dimensional, they stop being people and start being symbols. Peter doesn't represent a real person anymore. He represents dumb Americans who don't think. Meg doesn't represent a real teenage girl. She represents women who accept abuse. Brian doesn't represent a real dog or person. He represents liberal intellectuals who think they're better than everyone. This transformation happened at the same time that Family Guy became more political.
That's not a coincidence.
To use characters as political tools, you have to simplify them. Complex characters with multiple traits and realistic emotions are hard to use for making political points. But simple characters who represent one idea,
Those are perfect for propaganda.
The show also started ignoring continuity, which means the characters stopped learning from their experiences. Critics noted that characters no longer learn lessons at episode end. Peter could do something horrible in one episode, and by the next episode, everyone would have forgotten about it. Nothing mattered, nothing changed.
The characters were stuck in a loop.
This lack of consequences validates the stupidity in comedy, as one review pointed out. If Peter never faces real consequences for being terrible, then being terrible must be okay. The show was sending a message that actions don't matter, which is a pretty depressing worldview, but it also made the show easier to use for politics. Characters could take extreme positions without having to deal with the results. The show's stories also lost all semblance of reality, according to critics. Early Family Guy had exaggerated but believable plots. Later Family Guy had episodes about time travel, alternate dimensions, and complete fantasy scenarios. When your show doesn't have to follow any rules of reality, you can make any political point you want without worrying about whether it makes sense. South Park, another adult animated comedy, actually made a whole episode making fun of how Family Guy was written. They showed manatees, which are large sea animals, randomly selecting balls with words on them to create Family Guy jokes. The idea was that Family Guy's humor was completely random and required no thought or skill. It was just throwing random things together and hoping something would be funny. Family Guy responded to this criticism by leaning into it. Instead of trying to prove South Park wrong by writing better episodes, they made episodes that were even more random and chaotic. They acted like the randomness was intentional and artistic, but really, it was just lazy writing. And lazy writing made it easier to push political messages because you didn't have to make those messages fit into coherent stories. The character changes also reflected what was happening in American politics at the time. As the country became more divided between liberals and conservatives, people stopped seeing those who disagreed with them as complex human beings. They saw them as simple villains who were either stupid or evil. Family Guy's characters became more one-dimensional at the same rate that American political discourse became more one-dimensional. Brian is the clearest example of how character decay served political goals. Early Brian was a voice of reason who happened to have opinions. Later Brian was just opinions with a voice. He existed solely to express Seth MacFarlane's political views. Every storyline involving Brian became about politics. He couldn't just be in an episode, he had to be pushing an agenda. The show also stopped pretending that characters had consistent personalities. Peter would be smart when the plot needed him to understand something, then become an idiot again when they needed him to do something stupid. Lois would be a caring mother in one scene and completely neglectful in the next. The characters were whatever the writers needed them to be at any given moment. This inconsistency made the show feel hollow. When characters don't have stable personalities, you stop caring about them. They're not people you can relate to or root for. They're just puppets doing whatever the writers want. And when you stop caring about the characters, the only thing left is the message the show is trying to send. Critics noticed all of this happening. Reviews started saying things like, "The characters have all become terrible people," and "I don't care what happens to any of them anymore." Fans who had watched since the beginning felt like the show had lost its heart. The Griffin family didn't feel like a family anymore. They felt like a collection of awful people who happened to live in the same house. The transformation of the characters also made the show meaner. Early Family Guy could be crude, but it had warmth underneath. The family genuinely loved each other, even when they fought. Later Family Guy was just cruel for the sake of being cruel. Characters would say and do horrible things to each other, and it was supposed to be funny just because it was shocking. This meanness extended to how the show treated everyone. Characters, viewers, celebrities, politicians, everyone. The show became hostile and angry. It stopped trying to bring people together through humor, and started trying to divide people by making them pick sides. You were either with Family Guy's politics, or you were the enemy. All of these character changes added up to create a show that was fundamentally different from what it had started as. The Family Guy of seasons 1 through 3 was a family sitcom that happened to be animated and happened to include some political jokes. The Family Guy of later seasons was a political show that happened to feature a family and happened to be animated. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And as we'll see, this transformation didn't happen in a vacuum. The changes to the characters, the increase in political content, and the show's overall decline in quality all reflected bigger changes in how American culture dealt with politics and entertainment. Section 12. The Cultural Verdict. What Family Guy's political journey reveals. So after looking at all these episodes and all these changes over more than 20 years, what can we actually say about Family Guy's political journey? Where did this show end up, and what does that tell us about comedy, politics, and television in America? The first thing to understand is that Family Guy is still on the air. As of 2026, the show is in its 20th season and shows no signs of stopping. This is actually pretty incredible when you think about it. The show was canceled in 2003, brought back in 2005, and has been running continuously ever since. Most TV shows don't last 5 seasons. Family Guy has lasted more than 20. But lasting a long time doesn't mean the show stayed good. Critics and fans have been complaining for years that Family Guy's quality declined significantly. People who watch the show now say it feels uninspired, copy and pasted, with jokes that are just old internet memes because they ran out of 80 references. The show is still popular enough to stay on TV, but it's not the cultural force it used to be. There's actually a whole book written about Family Guy by college professors. It's called Family Guy and Philosophy, A Cure for the Petarded, and it examines the religious, political, social, economic, and philosophical insights hidden in the show. Real university professors sat down and wrote serious essays about what Family Guy means and what it says about American society. According to these professors, the show tackles huge topics: death, environmental consciousness, medical ethics, political morals, self-identity, gender expectations, organized religion, sexual norms, civil rights, the Holocaust. The book argues that Family Guy deals with issues that, quote, many people will usually not wrap their minds around. It suggests the show is actually really smart and meaningful, even though it hides that intelligence behind crude humor. One professor wrote that Family Guy is filled to the brim with very sophisticated satire and social issues. Another said the show has no sacred cows in Quahog, meaning it treats no subject as off-limits. The book describes the show as having an equal opportunity to offend and yet equally in favor of diversity and tolerance, a unique dichotomy. In other words, the show makes fun of everyone, but also supports treating everyone fairly. But here's the problem with this view. It mostly applies to early Family Guy. The professors writing these essays were looking at seasons 1 through maybe 7 or 8. They were examining the Family Guy that still had balance and nuance. The Family Guy that came later, especially during and after the Trump era, lost a lot of that balance. Modern Family Guy still makes offensive jokes, but it's not really making fun of everyone equally anymore. The show has picked a side. It's liberal, it's proud of being liberal, and it's not interested in pretending otherwise. Seth MacFarlane openly admitted that Family Guy tends to be very liberal because it's written by liberals. Once the creators said that out loud, the show stopped even trying to seem balanced. This creates an interesting question. Can you do good political satire if you're only attacking one side? Shows like South Park try to make fun of both liberals and conservatives. They'll do an episode mocking Democrats one week and Republicans the next week. Family Guy used to work that way too, but it doesn't anymore. Now it mostly just attacks conservatives and treats liberal positions as obviously correct. Some people think this is fine. They argue that in an era where conservative politicians like Trump say and do outrageous things, comedy shows have a responsibility to call them out. They believe Family Guy is being brave by taking a clear political stance instead of pretending to be neutral. They see the show's partisanship as honesty, not bias. Other people think the show has become propaganda. They point out that comedy is supposed to make you laugh and think, not just confirm what you already believe. When Family Guy makes fun of Trump or conservatives, it's mostly telling liberal viewers things they already think. It's not changing minds or offering new perspectives. It's just preaching to the choir. There's also the problem that the show's political jokes often aren't very funny. Critics of the Trump episode said it was just 20 minutes of the same orange man dumb jokes we hear on every talk show, making fun of Trump's hair, his hands, his weight. These jokes had been done a million times before Family Guy got to them. The show wasn't being creative or insightful, it was just recycling jokes everyone had already heard. This connects to a bigger issue with modern Family Guy. The show has become lazy. Critics complain that most political jokes become dated very quickly, and that references that are too current make no sense in future reruns. When you watch an old Family Guy episode that makes jokes about whatever was in the news that week, those jokes don't work anymore. But when you watch an old Simpsons episode that makes jokes about human nature, those jokes still work decades later. The show's defenders would say this is unfair criticism. They'd argue that being timely and relevant is more important than being timeless. They'd say Family Guy is responding to what's happening in America right now, and that matters more than making sure the jokes will still be funny in 20 years. They have a point. Comedy can be valuable even if it's temporary. But here's what's really interesting. Even people who agree with Family Guy's politics often admit the show isn't doing politics well. Liberal viewers who hate Trump still thought the Trump episode was bad. People who agree with Brian's atheism still thought the atheism episode was too heavy-handed. The show's problem isn't just that it's partisan, it's that it's partisan in a clumsy, obvious way. The transformation of Family Guy from balanced satire to political activism reveals something important about American culture in the 2000s and 2010s. As the country became more politically divided, entertainment became more political too. People stopped just wanting to be entertained. They wanted their entertainment to validate their political beliefs. They wanted shows that would tell them they were right and the other side was wrong. Family Guy gave its audience what they wanted. The show's viewers are mostly younger and more liberal, so the show gave them liberal political content. This made the existing fans happy and brought in new fans who liked the political messaging. But it also drove away viewers who had different political views, or who just wanted to watch a comedy show without getting a political lecture. The show's approach to controversy also changed over time. Early Family Guy would do controversial episodes like When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, and then seem surprised when people got upset. The controversy seemed accidental, like the creators genuinely didn't realize they were crossing a line. Later, Family Guy started doing controversial things on purpose, knowing it would create outrage and get people talking about the show. This calculated controversy is different from accidental controversy. When you offend people by accident, it means you were trying to be funny and misjudged where the line was. When you offend people on purpose, it means you value attention more than you value comedy. Modern Family Guy often feels like it's trying to be controversial just to get attention, not because the controversy serves the joke.
One review summed up the modern show this way:
sick humor can be even more relevant today during times of deeply rooted social upheaval. The idea is that when society is going through big changes and conflicts, we need comedy that's willing to
be offensive and push boundaries.
But that same review noted the show uses no embellished, politically correct language. It just says what it thinks, bluntly. This bluntness is both the show's strength and its weakness. On one hand, it's refreshing to see a show that says what it means instead of hiding behind carefully chosen words. On the other hand, bluntness without cleverness is just yelling. The best political comedy makes you laugh while making you think. Modern Family Guy often makes you groan while making you roll your eyes. The show has also been accused of becoming mean-spirited, ugly, and lazy. These aren't criticisms about politics, they're criticisms about quality. The show used to be crude but creative. Now it's crude and repetitive. The writers seem tired, like they're going through the motions rather than trying to make something special. Interestingly, some of the show's best recent episodes are the ones that don't try to be political at all. When Family Guy just tells stories about the characters without pushing a message, it can still be funny. But those episodes are rare now. Most episodes have at least some political content, even when it doesn't fit naturally into the story. The show's legacy is complicated. On one hand, Family Guy proved that adult animated comedies could be huge hits. It paved the way for shows like American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Bob's Burgers, and many others. It showed that animation wasn't just for kids, and that you could tackle serious topics in cartoon form. On the other hand, Family Guy also showed how a successful show can coast on past success without trying to improve. It demonstrated that you can keep getting viewers even when your quality declines, as long as you give your audience what they expect. It proved that being controversial is sometimes more valuable than being good. The biggest question about Family Guy's political journey is whether it actually accomplished anything. Did all those political episodes change anyone's mind? Did the Trump episode convince a single Trump supporter to oppose him? Did the atheism episode make any religious person question their faith? Probably not. The show was mostly talking to people who already agreed with it. So what was the point? Maybe the point was just to make the people who agreed feel validated. Maybe it was to give liberal viewers a place where their political views were treated as obviously correct, and everyone else was mocked. Maybe it was just Seth MacFarlane using his platform to express his opinions, regardless of whether it made good television. What we can say for certain is that Family Guy changed dramatically over its run. The show that started in 1999 is barely recognizable compared to the show that airs now in 2026. The humor is different, the characters are different, the goals are different. The only things that stayed the same are the names and the setting. This transformation from comedy to activism, from satire to propaganda, from balanced to partisan, that's the real story of Family Guy's political journey. And whether you think that transformation was good or bad probably depends on whether you agree with the politics the show ended up promoting. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.